call this meeting to order, and I'll open by saying we acknowledge and respect the Indigenous peoples within the traditional lands we're meeting today. And I'd also like to recognize, of course, that today is a provincial day mourning for the tragedy at Tumbler Ridge. So I would just like to have a moment of silence before we start. Thank you, everyone. We can now begin our meeting. The adoption of the agenda. Any additional items? You know, you had a late edition, but I think it's on here. I'm good.
RCMP.
Yep.
So move adoption as presented.
Seconded by Director Tierney. All in favor? Motion is carried. And we'll also receive the minutes of the February 5th Creston Valley Services meeting.
So I wanted to make a note. I did mention to Robin on item 9.3, we talked about shortening the 5-month extension to 4, which brings the date back to June. So I passed to Robin. It says July right now, but the whole point is to open things up for Canada Day, not knowing what's going to go on with our staff monthly extension. So that was one small correction. The other one is in under 9.5, there's reference to appointment of directors to positions, etc. And it should read board appointment of directors, kind of a fussy point, but that was a whole discussion. If the board appoints a director to an external committee, we already must report to board every month, and we may report here. So it's just additional
Boards. So we'll receive those changes and
amendments.
okay, so we will just go right into our staff reports. For some reason, we have budget discussions. Document here.
So are we expecting the staff to give us a report on every one of these? Or are we just going to start chatting about it and directing questions to staff? What is it?
I think we'll do it that way because we don't, I really don't know how much we're going to change. So I think we will start with and have that discussion and then question staff as needed. Is that right?
I think that's probably the best use of time.
And then, Chair, if we could just do them in the order in the package, I thought like scribble notes on some, nothing on others.
Yeah.
Could I suggest we offer freedom of the floor to Councillor Dumas?
Okay, so moved by Director Jackman and seconded by Director Vandenberg. All in favor? Motion carried. Denise, if you want to come forward, you can walk.
Oh, let's see, we're gonna make sure.
Yeah, on your kneecap, yes.
Thank you.
So then we'll start with Service Level 7, Economic Development, Area 8.
Thanks. So if I can, we had a conversation at EDC, Area EDC a month ago, and then we had one just a couple days ago on Tuesday. I was hoping I'd be able to talk to our EDC about the Economic Action Partnership, and by then we might have had a Christina Venting report sort of showing the governance shifts. And then what I see is most important, a list, if we are to go out with for proposal from an external entity to provide service, what would include the strong together matrix, or would also include position recruitment, include tourism booths and that kind of stuff. We've had the conversation about who's paying for what. So all I could get out of the meeting was sort of two questions from people. You know, they're saying economic development is the purpose of S107 and S108. Usually development is stuff that's emergent or growing. And it's not economic to have duplication. So the citizen committee, which I have, said, well, question, how much duplication is there in the physician recruitment program versus added value? And I tried to explain there's a broad recruitment process, but sometimes adding the little extra information about the difference of here versus trail or versus wherever it costs is important. But I couldn't tell them if if it's been analyzed, that contract and that service for added value versus duplication. So the citizen committee, it's like, so it's hard to support it, even though knowing Windle people have doctors here and Great Creek and Crawford Bay people have doctors in Nelson and everything in between. The other one was the same thing, duplication of tourist info services versus the MRDT taxation services. There's two of those, of course, which don't duplicate or cut off between areas A and C, the boundaries. So it's an honest conversation with me because I have a commission with a voice to the board and they don't have the information about what is exactly all that money being spent on and how much to duplicate. And has that been analyzed by S108? So all we came up with, and that direction the staff, if they'll accept it, is to change the 2026 requisition for S107 to $50,000 and put any funds that are not allocated elsewhere into the grants lines. We can have a conversation about that. So that does, it gives us a little more money this year than last year. Plus we've carried almost $7,000 from last year. And we'll just wait for what I would hope would be clear information to the Area A Economic Development Commissioners that what they would buy into, like extending or expanding what they pay for, is not duplication of provincial service. That's the only change I have on that.
So, question, I don't know how you want to manage this, but so I didn't realize this, but you have a contribution to physician program and tourism program. Is it, oh, you don't with 107?
Yep. We have supported the clinic for Bay physician recruitment. We have supported the MRDP to a small extent, but more so the Chamber of Commerce, the Lake Chamber of Commerce. We've supported other, what we feel are tourism growth areas like trails development, Seashore Trail and Biking Association. We support those things. Also have supported, but usually through community development, the Trails for Creston Valley Society. Okay. You know, the Windle expansions, the four bridge replacements, which all you guys have supported as well, up Sanka. So, yeah, so we have a number of things that we support. We're supporting the geothermal project, but we're not directly supporting the two that you mentioned. We at one time supported the joint tourism info booths, and that goes all the way back to the border booth, the booth here, and the manned booth in Crawford Bay. One time we had three of them, and we jointly supported. When somebody changes down here that our group has said, well, we're going to just support these backyard things.
Okay.
Recognizing, you keep telling them a third the population of Area A lives like 10 minutes from downtown Creston. That's where they're at. Yeah, and I ran the numbers again if you wanted. So if we show what's under contracted services, 25,000 or change versus S108 contracted, which may have more than the EAP, Area A is 21% of that. We had the old formula. Our population is approximately 15% of the total, but our tax base is 25% of the total. And if you did a weighted average, we'd be paying nominally 20% into the EAP, and the numbers on the page today are 21%. So we're supporting the EAP in what I thought was a fair approach to the agreed big picture initiatives that help all of us. The other things are outliers. So we've left money, we'll leave money in the Area A budget, but the Area A Commission, which I have to respect, having a voice to the board, doesn't understand duplication issues, and they'd love to.
Okay.
So, going back to what you said when you started, is there a motion that you wanted to
Just
bring to this?
the direction of staff is to make the 2026 requisition for this service $50,000 instead of 45. Put anything that's not otherwise allocated in the line items as expenses into grants. Which something captured. We're not doing individual motions here. These are just direction of staff to update.
Yeah. So raise that 50,000, and what was the last part of that?
That nominally $5,000 difference goes into the grants line item under expenditures. We don't know if it'll end up by amendment being under contract to go to AP or where. It's just sitting under grants. That brings our grants, unallocated grants budget to almost 27,000, waiting for what comes up.
Right.
Service 108, economic development areas B and Creston in areas B and C.
So if I may, let's start with what specifically does 108 cover? Let's list those entities that receive support from 108. And I would look to staff to give me that list. Just so that we're clear when we're talking about numbers, what it is we're talking about. So position recruitment, it's going to be tourism, it's going to be KES, the EAP program, helping.
It's no longer Canada Day and it's no longer other celebrations like Christmas, I understand, because that's under
Community functionality. Because there's a number of them that fit into that.
community events, I guess.
Community events. Is
Somebody help
physician,
fill in the blanks.
is physician program supported out of that?
Yeah.
There's a tourism contribution come out of there.
I think historic, but it may be time limited, Director Vandenberg, sorry, through the chair, because I think there's an obligation for so many years in the first round.
So it's always an ask, and then if they're in a presentation, they have an ask. And it has been the same process for the last couple of years, although they're at a point in time now where they may not have to come for an ask anymore. Because they've now created reserves and so on and so forth. So the tourism is in there. What about our, I call it the tourism
Visitor center.
visitor center. Thank you. Visitor center come out of there?
I think so.
Or no, actually, the visitor center comes out of 245 out of rec, doesn't
No,
it?
it's through the chair, it's your salaries and benefits line item, it's partially that under S1.
He has to put his hand up.
Who's clapping?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, through the chair, Creston Valley Visitor Center in S108 for 2026. Total contribution including salaries is 185,821.
So that's a requisition amount?
No, sorry, it's not the requisition. That's the contribution for salaries, rentals, and so that's the costs. The expenses in S108 that are going towards Creston Valley Visitor Center.
So out of the 473,000 total, 185 of that is visitor center. Yeah, that's what I'm reading. 473, 489 is the total expenses for 2026. Oh, that's 2025. I gotta make this different.
That's correct, 470, 2026.
And you just need a point of reference here. So, so our total is 473. Okay, our requisition amount is 337. So it's gone up 40 grand from 2025. So what do we get? What's changed for 40 grand? Why does it change 40,000 from 2025?
Through the chair, so the bulk of that is the Kootenay Employment Services, which has gone up by about $27,000.
Why? We're winding that down.
Have you tendered out?
So I guess maybe the question would be, the anticipation increase of 40 grand for requisition is in lieu of the workshop, around the workshop that we did the governance model on. So we're gonna be setting aside monies that once we work through the governance model and reestablish what our dev is gonna look like in our community, we have those monies to be able to populate that outcome. But my question then is, and that's fine, and that's what we need to do. But my question is around, if we're increasing at 40,000, why are we increasing at 40,000? We don't know what it's going to be. So I'm hesitant to just suggest that we increase it 40 grand without specifically understanding why we're doing it. And so there's an increase to KES of half of that, 20 grand,
27,000.
27,000, so a third, of 2/3 of that.
If I could suggest, Chair, your actuals are gonna be low because we're already effective almost 2 months into the year. There's no contract. So, and that's what happened last year, right? Contracted actuals were lower than budgeted. Because again, contract expired. So to project any increases, doesn't make sense if we're not even gonna have a contract in place partway of the year. We haven't decided on how to rejig the governance, we haven't seen the report back, all that may not happen until April. So $40,000, I expect is just gonna result in a bigger operating surplus to roll into next year. Which comes back to the question that I've been asking myself, my peers, if we want to take money out of our taxpayers' pockets today, we don't know we can spend it. We want to let them reduce their credit card debt because they're paying 19% of it. So we don't know we can spend the money. We don't know we can have a contract in place. We don't know we'll be spending X dollars this year. Why take people's money? And your surplus already says, your budget already says you think you're going to have 30,500. Sorry. You already project the $30,000 surplus out of this year going into next. Like the page you're looking at says you're already taking more money. Even if you had the contract for EAP, you're already gonna still fund 30,000 more into next year. So my question would be, why take more money if you don't know you can spend it? And you expect to have a surplus.
Can Gary,
I printed these because I couldn't.
so that which we have in front of us, the draft is what you have, so we're on the same.
Yeah, under
Okay.
2027, at the prior year surplus, you say you're gonna have 30,000 this year available for next year before you tax.
So my question to staff is going to be, if we, for 2026 budget, if we stayed with the 296 of 2025, are we able to continue funding the programs for 2026? If we stay with 2025 requisition for 2026, do not increase the 40 grand. What does that mean?
Through the chair, there's an accumulating operating surplus, so I guess you would be able to use that to fund the programs at this level, or reduce the program budgets, which we'd have to get the direction of which ones to reduce.
Well, you won't be able to get direction yet because we don't know what it's gonna look like yet. This year will determine what that EAP structure is going to look like. And that is everything but physician and visitor center dependent.
Do we know when that RFP is scheduled to be put up?
I'll bet it's not gonna be ready till like June.
Won't be ready quickly, but of course, we'll be addressing that subject on the agenda of our next Creston Valley Services meeting in March. So we'll have a clearer picture of that, what we intend to do.
Okay, so then tentatively, I would say, because we have how much in surplus? Like 155, how much do we got in surplus? I can never understand these lines.
you were using 87,000 prior
In
to
surplus.
surplus. So what I'm talking about is the risk of digging a big hole for the future year, right? If you
But
don't
your
increase
comment
taxation-
on pulling the taxpayer money out of their pocket now, just to stick it up into a savings account, when we don't have a clear budget on how we're spending that money, I don't know if I agree with that way of doing things in this particular service.
So the reason I bring it up is you have been typically accumulating surplus for many years. And you don't know what your sort of zero-based, bottom line, steady state budget is. This year and future years, if you go back into EAB contracts, if we have less money, we just write a contract or terms of reference to spend up to that amount and no more. So we may find that in future years, instead of a consultant or a society or whoever is delivering the service, instead of them saying, let's do this because we have time and money to pursue it, we'll say, no, you don't have time and money to pursue that. You're going to pursue a limited set of activities within that limited budget. We haven't established that baseline limited budget. As I say, though, you're at risk of digging a hole. The other thing, you have an external contribution identified, specified there of 2026 at 30,500. So the one source of that external contribution is S107. But the S107 budget doesn't have that amount. Under contracted, it has 25,560. So I don't know where the other $5,000 of external contribution is coming from, but it's not on the S107 page. Now, S107 commissioners have agreed to boost the budget, and we could throw more money into that. But the numbers don't jive. So you may have some other external contribution. That may be the $5,000 out of S242 for community activities, the sort of number we discussed. I'm not sure if that's what's intended. I think you have once.
Well, it sounds like we're gonna have an opportunity to discuss this again in March, as Arnie had pointed out. So I think, and I'm not, I see that Yeb has his hand up. But I'm inclined to say that direction right now is 2025 requisition amount for 2026. And then let's explore some of these answers to questions we're tabling in our March session. At which point we could change that amount.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, through the chair, that external contribution is the town and Creston's contribution to cover the salaries and benefits of the staff member providing those physician recruitment services.
Thanks.
What about your contribution then to 107?
So then, if I may then chair, so what I'd ask, we used to sort of flow the 107 money through 108 and then to the contract. So now they're completely separate. 107 money is going directly to whatever the contract becomes, and S108 money is going directly, assuming that they're split up. That was my preferred direction a few years ago, but it used to be 107 flowed through 108 and then to the other. So yeah, okay, that's fine.
That's my suggestion. You don't have to agree with me. We can debate this. We're gonna debate this again in March.
Could I ask for a reminder of what the 2025 actuals were for S108? Because you should always keep in mind holding enough money to cover the previous year's actuals, whatever they happen to be.
Well, according to my dealio here, is 296 was spent to date. The budget is for 337 or 296. So spent to date 296, budget's 296. And I'm saying adopt that for 2026.
So that's requisition.
That is.
Which always matches because we pull that money. The province pulls that money for us automatically. It's the total 2025 expenditure.
Total income or total expense? I guess.
Total
it's the same.
expenditure. I don't know if I know what the actual is. I see the budget.
Okay, so I'm looking at this from the wrong context of mind. Am I?
97,851.
Total spent 446.
446 spent on a 497 budget. So we go with the 496 to 2026, 497.
Well, if
Until we
you
have
have,
our March meeting.
if you have 30.5 coming in from town and roughly 18.8 coming in from,
See, this shouldn't be our job to figure all this stuff out.
without a prior year surplus, you have shy of $60,000 coming in. So then if you take 60 from last year's actual 446, I would say you should be taxing $387,000. Because you have a prior year surplus, you're masking the actual cost. But that said, you don't have a contract for EAP now, so you have no idea what that cost actually would be. And perhaps physician recruitment and other allocations to external groups could be reviewed.
Right, but I'm gonna take it right back to requisitions. That's what we're asking our taxpayers to support. To me, I don't understand enough of the expense lines. And this is 3+ years in, I still don't understand. That's why I started out asking, what does this all apply to? It's just, so I am forced to look at the requisition lines and say, the ask is for 40 grand more for 2026 over 2025. Not getting a lot of reasons why, but we have an opportunity in March to address that, which is why I'm saying keep the requisition amounts from 2025, carry it over to 2026. Do we have that more detailed conversation? And that's the way my mind sits on this.
In essence, we don't have to even do that because we want to have that March conversation. So
You're right.
we can set that amount with the conversation that we have on economic development or EAP in March. So go ahead, Yep.
Yeah, through the chair, the increase in requisition is, well, a lot of that is explained by the reduction in prior year surplus.
57,000.
No, I don't get that. Surplus should decrease requisitions, not increase.
For 1 year it can, and then it digs a hole. So the question is, you're gonna balance how deep you dig that hole. Not dig too deep of a hole this year, not knowing what your future obligations for contracts will be.
Correct, but that's the purpose of a budget. Budget is, you don't pad, cannot justify padding a budget, you don't pad a budget. The problem with the challenge with 108 is that we don't know how the whole governance and economic development model is going to shape out. We don't know how it's going to impact or make efficient those contributions that we historically were giving are probably going to be combined. So there's got to be some degree of efficiency there. Otherwise, why are we doing it? In my mind. And forgive me for being bold in my discussions.
You're an auctioneer. We could start to draw it down by auction if you wanted to.
I can,
But there must be some thinking behind this we're not getting, because, 41% or 41,000 ask increase this year and almost 50,000 the following year. That's 90,000 in 2 years. So
Because you're burning off
25% increase.
the prior year surplus at the same expected level of expenditure is what you're doing. I'm suggesting maybe challenge the level of expenditure, because once you run out of prior year surplus, everything is just through the roof.
Yeah, you don't have a pad, no cushion left.
Yeah.
And that's something I wouldn't recommend. I think there should always be a bit of a cushion there. But, in order to have the better discussion on this, we'll do that with the AAP discussion. But I guess I would suggest, that you kind of examine these figures again and with the view of that upcoming discussion and see if, be able to answer some of the questions that we'll be generating then, because there's still confusion over some of this. But I think since we're seeking clarity and we'll have that discussion then, I would like to just kind of defer S108 till we do that. And in the meantime, if you guys have any questions of you have now, that will be beneficial for that discussion, and I would suggest we do that now.
are we recording this?
Yeah.
Thank you. Good. Okay, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
So, okay, we'll keep that one in abeyance for the time being then, and, have that more fulsome discussion. And then also we'll have, probably Mike and Stu at the table, they may be able to answer questions that we have now, so. So can we move to this service 129 then, fire protection, agency?
I know Gary's gonna kick in here.
Well, I have a couple of questions, yeah. So the year-to-date under contracted services, that's the town, doing all our training and the paid on call and the like, is still not up to the budget. So that is, though, is still a final number, and that fluctuates, I understand, based on the number of calls. But our year-to-date numbers pretty much final now? 161,000 in town, or is there still an outstanding bill from the town? Reason I'm asking, there's only two places we build in any kind of a buffer. So our payments to the town have been lower than budgeted. Yeah, we're raising the budget a little bit. That's the only one area of potential buffer. The three areas, but the contribution to reserve is split into two. So I think Director Vandenberg and I had asked our services staff in December to see this sheet breakdown for replacement of major apparatus. Where are we at? We have 5 years on a pumper, 2 years on a pumper. The tenders almost even, fairly deep. And how that works with our contributions to reserve. It's kind of what now is we're just increasing the requisition by a CPI type thing, increasing the possible payments to the town by a similar amount, and then dumping the rest into reserve. So that's our buffer. That, I don't think we ever got that number. What is the projected replacement cost for the major apparatus? And what is the projected building upgrade cost? Because the building is still under the regional district side of this. So those would be nice numbers to have. And then there's another item that we'd asked about several times. Under the contract to town, we allocated an amount for alternative water supply, which I identified later as I think that was a mistake. Not that I'm worried about money's gonna go away, but back when Stefan was CFO, if I asked a question like, well, how much money have we got set aside? It's 8,000 a year over 5 years for alternative water supply. I couldn't get a straight answer because he had a complex set of books to look at. Now your new CFO, same thing. So I suggested that amount of reserve for alternative water supply needs to be put back in your regional district account. The reason is because realistically, that would be a conversation with the emergency services staff, both RD and town, and a conversation between Director Vandenberg and I, who are continually trying to enhance the water supply out of the Manila Irrigation District. They're fairly big numbers. So we've been putting small grants and we may be putting larger grants towards that. But it would be a mistake to leave this annual contribution for enhanced water supply, additional water supply, stuck in a ledger somewhere. We should be using it, like the one hydrant at the junction of Lower Window downtown. We have identified an upgrade to a hydrant, which would do exactly what that reserve, with the words in our contract, the town say, we will work towards this. But we have no way to take that money and mobilize it as we're giving the money to Window Irrigation District to other work. So I would like that amount identified, what is town holding from accumulated from that particular reserve amount. I'd like that amount to show in the 2026 budget as a transfer from town to this budget in revenues. And then in 2026, the expenses, I'd like to see it come right back out of this operating budget and go into reserve. And the fire services reserve should be tagged for major apparatus, the building, and this alternative water supply. And as Director Vandenberg and I progress with our work to support the 600-700 people or more, 800-900, could be 1,000 people now relying on that irrigation district, we can use this money. and meet the targets of what we set in the contract.
Including the Creston Dyken district as well.
Yeah, there's
where
a-
customer.
110 parcels there, so I don't know how many people, there's 1,000 people that we're trying to serve. So my request to staff, identify and move that money from town to this budget this year. Take it in our expense line and move it out of the operating budget into a reserve. And tell me before March, what are the balances of the reserves? And what is the required contribution reserve for the major apparatus replacement and the building? How are we doing on that?
So while that is being contemplated, Gary talked about the apparatus cost being thin. So the reserve contribution looks like it's just shy of 30%. The 75,000. So is that a good number towards to bank money towards the apparatus, future apparatus replacement? That's a question. 30%, that's a question. The other question I have is, where in here do we are putting money aside for asset management? Where are we with our asset management there? Is there a plan to utilize money for asset management in 2026 if we're still searching for a software to consolidate all our assets into a program? That's my question.
Yeah. Correct, yeah.
Yeah, well-
Stan's hand up.
Whoever can answer it, I guess.
Yeah, through the chair, yes, so we're working towards that asset management program. The apparatus, we do have an apparatus schedule, and in the current budget, there's a $900,000 expenditure for replacement of apparatus in the service in 2029. The total current reserve balance is $640,000 for this service.
Okay.
So, Chair, the reason I asked to see the schedule is that the 900 is a fire pump. But can we spend 10,000, rebuild the primary pump, have it recertified, and defer the purchase another 5 years? I'd like to see the schedule. I know I'm not driving the bus, but in the past, been able to see these schedules. We asked for the schedule in December. It's February. Is there an option to the replacement in 2029? And part of the reason I want to know this, and we have no idea if any of the four of us can be sitting at this table a year from now. But I think we need a more clear record. Because in my mind, I'm still looking at, did we make a mistake, or were we not optimizing the taxpayers' interests when we said the regional district will hold the major apparatus? Because our moving major apparatus, our policy, may take a truck. We say we can't use a frontline pumper and we spend $1 million to replace it. And for $100,000, it goes to the Spokane, where they have multiple engines. And to them, they don't need the same frontline pumper. So the people in this valley who pay $1 million only get $100,000 policy. People in another valley benefit vastly because they can move the apparatus between the halls and still meet their FUS requirements. So if we didn't optimize this for this valley, if the town held this apparatus, they can do exactly that. They can move a truck from one hall to another within whatever works and hold the value of that truck till its real end of life, because none of these trucks are worn out. It's just a piece of paper that says that they have to be replaced. So the model we have potentially loses tremendous value because each of our apparatus, our groups of apparatus are tagged to separate little halls. The town maybe should get a transfer of this apparatus somehow, work that into the contract price. That may be the better way to go. But I want to see the schedule. I don't want to just see it for Window Lakeview. I'd love to see it for all of them. So we can sit down with town and have a bigger conversation. And then the next question is the buildings themselves. Now, the buildings may be best held by the regional district because we have staff looking after this massive building. We're pretty good at doing what they do. But this is a conversation we need to have. And that's why I asked about the schedule for replacement. I'm not happy to see, I don't know where I'll be in 3 years, but $1 million expenditure against this one community, when there may be a better approach. And without seeing the schedule, relocation or upgrading of that pumper as options, this is doing a disservice potentially to the valley. I would hate to see this all regional district procurement or disposition of assets and end up somewhere else without it being captured here, it could possibly be held here, this pumper. The same goes for Canyon. The same goes for future fire truck for Westerns.
Dr. Tierney.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. It's a good education to hear all what you're saying for us at the table here. I'm wondering if we have the right people, right staff person here to answer the question. I went through a meeting with the Yak and Canyon Lister fire halls some time ago. Where they explained their budget asks, and we talked about these things about fire trucks and expiration and what we've got built up for reserves, but I don't see, there's no point in putting in questions, I don't think, unless you have had all those answers, but it seems like, you know, if we're talking about fire service budgets, equipment, large expenditures, is there anyone on the
We have Dan, it's introduced to us.
Go ahead, Yeb.
Yeah, through the chair, we do have the ability to move apparatus between any RDCK services. They would just have to be at fair market values. So there's nothing stopping us from doing that. If there's an opportunity to move apparatus between the town of Creston and these RDCK fire halls, then that would have to be again at fair market value or would have to be a sale. So that nothing precludes us from doing that. If that makes sense, then you know that's certainly something that we would consider.
If I might share, the fair market value of an FUS certified frontline pumper is a very different number than the fair market value of a secondary pumper. And we don't have integrated services the way Spokane Valley has halls where they can do that. And we are required to offer it internally to regional district by policy prior to offering it to Creston. And that concerns me because the people of Wendell Lakeview are the ones who are going to pay the $1 million. And if that $1 million can be a benefit to the entire valley, that's what I want to see. There's a whole difference in fair market value of those two categories of pumpers. I think you'll find secondary pumpers all over the province from these small communities who can only ever hold one pumper. And the other one just goes away. Whoever's got $100,000 cash, you snap it up. We are a collective. There's no doubt we can extract the extra value of that H-Delta pumper that's actually still practically brand new, 2,000 kilometers. That's the difference I'm looking to analyze. I appreciate what you have said. It's quite true with the dollar values. It's a huge difference. This is why I'd like to have the fire chiefs in on the conversation too.
Yeah, and I hope those figures, you're quoting 100 grand, it's Canyon Lister just sold a pumper and a fire truck. I think they got 6,000 for one and 3,000 for the other. Ouch. I don't know if they could have just changed out
Well, were they end of life? Did they already
they were
recertify the pump one time?
Yeah, I think a fire department would tell us that it was end of life. And it's not going to
It's just out of active life. So
But did they recertify the pump? They get 5 more years out of recertifying.
Yeah.
The second line pumper.
imagine, but where is it?
Yeah, thank you. I was just wanted to point out that I'm wondering if these are the conversations that need to be happening with the Creston Valley Service Advisory Committee, and that's why the committee is being started so that these conversations can happen. From my understanding from our workshop, that these were things that were going to be part of the committee's responsibility to advise on. So I'm wondering if this conversation is down the road.
No, I agree with you. They're not really in line with our budgetary meeting, but for the future planning, I think that's a very good point.
Actually, I think it's completely in line with our budget conversations.
It is, but time is not in line, what I'm saying, we don't have that committee set up yet, so it will.
Oh, I see, sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So not knowing when that will happen, that's why I'd like to see those schedules of replacements since December, since before. I go back to my emails and tell you when I was asking for these schedules 10 years ago, because I keep all the emails. But today, this schedule is more important to me because I don't know how long that committee is going to take to get up and running and make decisions. But I want to make sure we have the best information in our minds and available to share with everybody at the time.
Let's give Dan the floor, he has his hand up, so go ahead, Dan.
Thank you through the chair. To Director Jackman, I have the same questions, and because I'm new and I'm looking at what we currently have as a model and a projection, and that we can make the best strategic approach in how we're navigating our apparatus replacement. I have similar questions. There are replacement schedules in place that I'm going to be reviewing, and that it is the direction that we need to go in. And I think the benefit that we have is like what you're flagging is a replacement that's going to be happening in 2029. So we have time to put a model together before that point, definitely, and be able to share that. So it's something that I have the intention of reviewing this year. That we have hopefully that it's not going to address this budgetary cycle, but going into next year's budgetary cycle. But we have time given the replacement schedule on that truck.
I'm also wondering if our large expenditure schedule for 2029, is that only for one apparatus or are we talking more than one to budget for? So I don't know how we're going to spend that money. We have it set aside for major expenditure, but again, is it only one or is it two that are needed? $500,000 each, I don't know.
That's a very good question, which is the reason for the schedule, requesting the schedule.
Yeah.
So let's see that. So if I may through the chair, my question around asset management on this service 129, what portion, what monies are being allocated towards our asset management program and what are they going to achieve?
Go ahead, Dan.
Or yeah, please go ahead.
Sorry, through the chair, I'm just addressing the first question. That $900,000 in 2029 is for one apparatus, and that's a fire engine. So yeah, as Dan mentioned, we'll be reviewing that, going through that, reviewing that this year. As we're all aware, it's about a 2-year delivery schedule for apparatus now, and we need to start making those plans fairly soon.
Sure, but I can't, because it looks as though Canyon Lister will need a tender for 2027. That's why I want to see all of them. Canyon Lister is a $567,000 capital next year. And again, do we have flexibility within the total amount of apparatus we have across the valley to satisfy that at a better price? That's a more strategic way of approaching, because that's 1 year away, and if that's not ordered already.
I think it is.
It's got two amounts. So the first amount's the deposit. You gotta put some outrageous amount of money down, I think, in advance to get these things, or they won't build it. So it's imminent. It's not 3 years away. And as Yev says, if you gotta order 2 years in advance and give a deposit, all of these conversations are timely this year. And again, I'm gonna repeat it because it's reality. 12 months from now, there may be 4 different people here who will have a much harder time understanding what the transition has been in fire services. Huge transition, and where all these pieces fit. If we can make a good decision this year on how we plan going forward, we'll do the next generation of service.
Yeah, Canyon Lister's tender is ordered and it's, they raised the money through, structural protection unit. 90% of it anyway.
My question on asset management, how much of the budget is the dollar amount allocated to asset management and what is the intended outcome with that money?
67.
Enlighten us, yeah.
through the chair, we don't, just a second, I'm looking here. We don't separate out asset management from apparatus in our reserves. So again, that's something we are, as we're going through our asset management development plan, is to break out the contributions to reserves and between apparatus and buildings for fire services. So we don't, as of today, we don't have that separation.
So then what I'm hearing is for S-129, there is no asset management dollar allocation to that budget.
Through the chair, not specifically broken out, but that's one of our key objectives under asset management plan is to separate out the components of the reserve and reserve contributions between apparatus and asset management for the hall structures themselves.
So I imagine, we've talked at board about a more detailed asset management plan and evaluation. I would assume this would be part of that. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, through the chair, yes, that's our goals with asset management. Is to do that, and if possible, get as much done even for next year's budget season, which would take a fair amount of work, but we're going through that process now, and are going through that process to see where the priorities are and what's achievable this year and what's achievable next year.
Thanks. So I guess that kind of brings us back around to the end of this conversation. Is are we satisfied with the budget as set up here in S-29, S-129? Yeah.
Of the points I raised, so the capital asset needs some work, and there is a little bit of money here. There's $6,700 transferring to A-122. So I hope we're going to get a drawing of the building. You're sure where the property line is, make sure everything scopes out there. And we're going to see the schedule. The other thing though that I raised is that our budget amount for the contract is variable depending on hours paid on call. So there's two ways to manage that. And we're currently carrying a prior surplus. So we could pick a more generic flat line number for our estimated contract service to town. And then anything that when you add everything else up, put it into a planned prior operating surplus. And the reason you do that, as we're doing in other services where you have variable revenues and expenses each year, significantly potentially, is that like in building inspection, then you have a policy. If you have an operating surplus, half of it goes to the balancing reserve, and the other remains in the budget. So again, because we're entering into contracts with potentially high variability, it just makes sense to approach this the same way we approach other services. We have policy around the operating surplus. Now, policy again will do the next generation of elected service. Because when you accidentally get a little bit of a operating surplus and spend it all in 1 year and don't tax, like I was talking earlier, these are options, you dig a hole. So as we're getting our asset, the building, capital replacement, we have a contract average value now over 4 or 5 years. You take that number and use that average number. You just don't inflate the budgeted number that you ran under and make a bigger number next year. You just don't do that. You say, what's the 4 or 5 year average? You take that number, you add something on it. But the real buffer for the elected officials partway through the year, if it's been a really bad year for falls, is in a planned operating surplus. And then everything else goes to reserve. So it's just a different strategy. I think if all of our services took that approach, it will help us merge later a little easier. Right now it's kind of random. Right now we have a major apparatus being bought by Canyon Lister, but a bonus money. That is not a reflection of the cost to operate the service. Because they had a bonus amount of money from something that looked like a good idea, and the province pulled the rug out from underneath with their policy on sprinkler protection units. That's not the way to budget, right? What your assets are, you know what your replacement schedule is, you know your options for shifting equipment around to optimize true at end of life. And then you have a policy around these one-off operating surpluses as to where you put the money. You carry a little bit as a buffer and you put the rest in reserve. We can always take money out of reserve if we get ourselves in a problem. But all of our services around the valley should have the same structure for our budgets. And then as we get into the future, it'll be easier to merge. So yeah, I would like to see, even though YAC's not part of the Valley Services, I'd like to see you do the same. I'd like to see Reendale do it because the chiefs talked to me year over year ago. Maybe they should be training here. And I said, yeah, maybe you should. I get from my daughter's house up there into town a lot faster than I get from anywhere to Nelson. It's just with the ferry unpredictability, it's just not an easy place to get to. So I wouldn't change very much. I would like the thought to come back in terms of policy, how we're dealing with the contract amount, and that it's a level amount for the contract, not just take last year's and inflate it. And have the buffering operating service. If someone has that number to come up with before March, it would be great.
When you look at the proposed increase this year for the next budget, it's only like $14,000, which is pretty nominal. The big picture. So
yeah,
I would suggest that we have that clarity. Don't mess with that number because it's already been based on existing budget management. And once we complete the asset management and develop some policies, that's probably a next year project and to delve into that deeper with the guidance of what we've learned in the next year.
Agreed. This is fairly stable, but in a month, I'd like to be able to tell everybody who comes here that we've either squeezed the $10,000 and didn't need to hold in our pocket 20 or 30 times, or we have a good reason for not being a little tighter on our budget because we have a better approach. And then tell them to stand by.
So I just want to make the point very clear that the asset management allocation on 59722 is $7,000 for this year. And once again, concerned with, I understand that building that because it's going to be an ongoing and it's a very important program, but we've got $3,000 allocated for the next number of years. My concern on 2026 is $7,000, so double what the next number of years are asking for. And we're not ready to, without the software, you're not ready to input any information. And as to Gary's point a little bit earlier, and has been saying, do we have digitized plans? Do we have any plans that can be inputted into the software once? Because that's just a formality. It's just moving what you have for information into a software so you can start evaluating your asset management. So my caution is, and back in the board discussions, we're earmarking a lot of money towards asset management, but it's not real clear as to how we're going to roll that out. So it's really a position of pulling from the taxpayer's pocket today for what we intend the asset management plan to achieve for tomorrow. But as the conversation needs to remind that, you know, we're going to be very diligent on what monies we're asking for. And if we don't have a particular budget to spend that money, we shouldn't be just collecting it because we think we might need it.
I just think when you look at the overall cost of what we have to replace, our transfer to asset management is relatively low.
It is.
And I think that if we plan our budgets to limit transfer of funds for the future, we are really shooting ourselves in the foot. So as much as we have a desire to keep taxes low, we have to think of the future here. And again, as Gary said, we may not all be here, but let's not leave it as a disaster for whoever is sitting at this table. So, you know, I prefer that we take a fairly liberal approach to asset management for the time being. And as we're planning asset management, again, based on the actual incredible expense of replacing things.
And I don't disagree with that at all. My whole point is, do we need to have today? Is it a nice to have or need to have?
Yeah, go ahead.
Through the chair, the reason the transfer to asset management service is approximately double in 2026 versus the future is that Windell is one of the few fire halls that does not have a recent building condition assessment. So that cost in 2026 includes a building condition assessment.
Thank you. That's what I'm shooting. That's what I want to hear.
So are we okay with just leaving that one as is for the time being? Okay. And I think we do have some explanation as to why it is what it is, and Yep can help us with that in our major budget meeting, I assume. So we move to Service 152, then Jaws of Life, areas A, B, and C. That's the next one.
No, 131.
Oh, sorry, yeah, 131.
And that is fire protection
Yep.
BC.
B and C, that Creston contract.
Looks like 103% increase. I think it's fabulous. And, that's right on.
Nothing jumps out at me on that one.
Okay. Well, then let's move on to Jaws of Life. Why not? Service 152.
Not much we can do with that right now.
Yeah.
Not much we can do. Jared did show us some numbers. You know, the town is covering a little bit of money on, I keep thinking PEP, but it's not PEP. It's authorization number, whatever. I had a note to myself to look back at those numbers again. I didn't get there. Until we rejig this service, not much we can do, I think.
No, we're drawing down our prior year surplus down to virtually nothing after this, so.
And we're still supporting Riendell and Yak. I had asked about, and I don't know, maybe Dan could comment on this just in generality, but it's probably not something he's been able to catch up on. Town is tracking really well what they do and where they go and when they do it. And I like Jared's sort of presentation. It's got charts, it's got pie charts. It's pretty clear to see if it's medical, lift assist, using tools for road rescue and stuff like that. It's easy to see. And I'd asked if we could emulate that with say Riendell or the other services so we can see. And then we would know, because we know from a decade or ago that the defined area fire service appeared to be fairly substantially subsidizing the road rescue component, especially knowing they go way out of the service area, the fire service down the road. But I haven't really seen that kind of chart that I see from town, which makes it easy for me to understand where the money's going. So I don't know if there's been any conversation about having not a fire chief or not anybody who's front line, but admin support to create the same kind of chart that we see from town, which lets me know what were the calls for service. They don't call. Where was that needed? And I still would like to see it in as much detail as possible because I want to talk to my neighbors in Boswell. If we're paying less than anybody else and we're getting really fast and good response for the road rescue side of what. So I don't know if that's been a conversation or not, Dan.
And to me, it looks like there's a 25% jump this year, and that's staying pretty consistent going forward. So it seems like they're making a correction as to what
We burned the
costs are
surplus.
really.
We used the surplus. Sorry, is that the Dan?
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Just to respond to Director Jackman's question, yeah, I think that kind of statistical presentation and being able to have a dashboard and an understanding of where our calls are going and the number of calls, response times, it's something that the fire services was working on before I stepped into this role. And we're looking to do at least a twice a year update, if not quarterly, of those statistics and being able to share that at CVSC as well as at the board for the whole of the regional district. We're not quite there yet, but we do have the statistical data. We're just looking for a way that is going to be able to present it in kind of an easy to understand method since we have so many fire departments, but it's definitely what we're aiming to do, and the board and this committee is going to see that this year.
So just for recapping for us new guys here, Roger and I, S192 is called JAWS, which in my mind is Vehicle Extrication First Responder. the purpose of the service is to be able to invoice the province for those, none more. So why isn't this just blended in to our regular fire services, and with the approach that Councillor Dumas just pointed out, our working towards our fire advisory, this is a great time, I would think. I guess my question is, why does this have to be a standalone service? Because of the boundary, is that, remind me, is that because of the boundary thing?
Yeah, so if I can, the first thing, because it was said before, back when my dad was on Calgary Fire Department, this thing came out, JAWS, this wonderful thing everybody should support. So it was supposed to be a vehicle electrification tools type support, especially outside of towns where you have the serious high speed accidents where you need tools. Then, in our wisdom collective, because I'm guilty as part of it over this 18-year journey, we say, well, let's do this. Let's add maybe some search and rescue. Let's put money to this, let's put money to that. So it's kind of a medical first response vehicle to electrification blended service. If you read the bylaw amendments, it overlaps with other stuff. So I 100% agree to what I just heard. Why not just take this away? And Tom Newell has done a substantial amount of work. Just take this away. Problem is the gaps.
Yeah.
So
Geographical gaps.
yeah, a little bit north of Windham, near the old Surgar mine processing, all the way up to the junction of 3A and Randall Road. If anybody's in trouble, that's a gap. It's a massive gap. So once you create a service, you pull the rug out from under your feet of being able to get a task number from the province because it's part of your service. So if we took away this service and said, okay, we want to optimize application for task numbers from the province where the tools are used and it's applicable, but we still want to be able to provide the medical first responder and other supports our community rely on. And just think of Lift Assist alone. Go up Great Creek Road to the top of Juniper, even tons of roads, even ones that are only a kilometer above the Seymour, 12% rate. Ambulances aren't getting to the houses and driveways and stuff. So Tom Newell did a lot of work as to how to fill the gap. And I'm happy to, in Area 8, say to my residents, you know what? We need to have a service that will fill a gap between what a fire service can realistically be budgeting for and what people outside of service areas need. So we're kind of stuck. We are looking at higher requisition because we went and burned part of your services, dug a hole. And we haven't made that transition to, I think, a better model yet. And I'm a little bit stalled on it. I always thought if we stop taxing for this, so, you know, last year, Area B paid 30 grand into this, 29,953. And you say, we're not going to give the allocation to town, which some of this money goes to town. The town will just roll the difference into the contracts, either Canyon Lister and how they administer and allocate time, you know, paid on call, or the other general contracts for Arrow and the like. Town can figure that out, just allocate it to there within that budget. The same for Window Lakeview. We don't subsidize Window Lakeview with a contribution from this because town does it all already. And if there's less money from this service to what town's doing in the south end of Area A and into Area C, they'll just adjust the contract amount. I'll trust them. So we can do away with this, but then we'll have big gaps.
Well, and I agree with what you're saying, but
Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you through the chair. I think if I can clarify a little bit what I think Director Jackman's talking about when it comes to gaps is that gaps are about fire protection area. So our fire protection area in Ryandale goes all from Ryandale Road up to, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, 3A highway, and then 3A Coakley Creek is outside fire protection area. However, Ryandale does, as part of this service, go all the way down there for road rescue. And you're right, Director Vandenberg, the Jaws of Life as the name of this service is an outdated thing. And we are going to be moving in a direction to call that road rescue, which is a more all-encompassing perspective of what we're actually doing when we're on the highway, providing that service. So where this comes from is when you're in fire protection area, you are not allowed to get a task number from EMCR for road rescue. However, as soon as you leave your fire protection area, you can get a task number. What the task number is it gives you money to deliver the service as in that moment. So whatever costs you can associate to that rescue. However, it doesn't pay for supporting the vehicle. It doesn't pay for training. It doesn't pay for supporting the equipment that you're using. A single small tool for extrication can cost up to $15,000, and a single claw on it can cost up to $5,000. So when those things break in training or during an extrication, we need to be able to replace those. And that's part of where the funding for this kind of service, why we do have expenses in this kind of service.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to, if I may, Gary. So the task number is an interesting thing that I don't quite understand. Whose authority does that? Whose authority is gives out the task number that gives you the ability to do something with it? And in my experience in the fire department, we worked with mutual aid agreements. You can write whatever you want into a mutual aid agreement, including the cost of delivering those services, specifically those services, the geographic area in which that mutual aid agreement is supposed to cover. And to me, in my mind, mutual aid agreement, you don't need a service, this one service. You cover all this, all these gaps and these levels of service in your mutual aid agreement. So maybe the task number that you refer to is that device that prevents the ability of negotiating a mutual aid agreement or having a mutual aid agreement in place. I don't know. So my question is, who is the originator of this task number and how does it influence what we're trying to talk about today or take away the opportunities of just going to mutual aid agreements?
We have, yeah.
Go ahead,
we have
Dan.
mutual aid agreements, mandatory.
The chair, so you had two questions there. Firstly, emergency management and climate readiness, so EMCR, or what we used to be EMBC, is the organization that gives out the task numbers. It's the same thing that, what it means is a task number gives you an expense recovery mechanism that comes from the province. So this is also connected to Local Government Act, where we're only delivering service where residents are taxed for it. So when it comes to mutual aid agreements, this is where Director Jackman's comment about there'd be gaps. So between the end of Windell's fire protection area and the end of Rindell's fire protection area, in the middle there isn't taxation for Rindell Fire Department or Windell Fire Department. And therefore, even if you had a mutual aid agreement, technically you shouldn't be delivering service within that, well, to Director Jackman's word, gap. So this service allows our fire apparatus to leave fire protection area to deliver service within that gap. So a mutual aid agreement isn't necessarily the right tool for that because there isn't actually a service for fire protection established in that section of the highway.
And if I might, we established mutual aid between our fire departments years ago, and then we shifted to a mandatory model. So we do have that, but it's there's the gap issue. So more sensible, instead of taxing people in Greendale and halfway, most of it completely pay for jobs, they're already paying for a fire service, which gives them a certain level of service. This is wall-to-wall jobs. So that service made more sense to start at that junction where the one fire protection area ends and go all the way down to the Amasco mine processing site in Area 8. And then there'd be another defined area in theory where there's other gaps. The biggest gap of all is Area 8. And when you do the math, Area A residents aren't paying enough. That's what it comes down to. You're kind of riding on the fact that the fire service, whatever end it is, already had to buy a premise. It already had to have all this equipment because they're providing that service as part of their service within the fire coverage area. And then incrementally, we're throwing a little more money at it. We used to not throw not nearly enough money at it. And now we're throwing a little more. But it's fundamentally a misnomer to have one service wall to wall that overlaps with other services that already do that. So this service should go away. The cleanest thing in Tom Dool's done work. This should just go away. It's a complicated, unnecessary way to provide service. We would say this does this, Randall, Windle, and Lister, town contract areas, etc. And if there's gaps where we feel we need a service, you set that defined service area to provide something that is more clearly described. So vehicle exploration, lift assist, medical first responder, that kind of stuff. Tom's gone a long ways on that.
So
But all of us have to agree that we're going to repeal one thing and establish something else. Because all of you guys participated in this convoluted service right now.
so when does that occur? When does this request for repeal occur?
You know, with everything going on, Chair, I just set it aside. I think Tom Dool has all the information we need. And he's got models for these new service areas. That's why I started asking Jared more and more, Chief Rail, more questions about how he's allocating time and how he's recovering costs, what's built into the contracts. What I've seen over the past year and some gives me great confidence. Town knows exactly who they dispatch where for what and what level of service. And they've also said that it makes no sense for them to provide assistance with the ambulance will beat the fire truck. So they don't do things in some of the contract areas or even Window Lake, Buchanan, and Lister that we do in Randall, because half the people on the Randall roster don't live there. They live in Crawford Bay and Great Creek, and they do need the ambulance, and that's the necessary thing, even if to secure an accident site. They're a necessary component. It's different. It's a different world. You're stretched out there, and so it should have a different home. And the town will tell us eventually where they feel they would like to provide services, not within one of their contract areas. And you guys will agree individually that, yeah, this is something that's a greater benefit to our citizens. They should be paying for it.
I guess that's a question, is when you change this, does that increase the burden on the ratepayers in that area?
It should increase the ratepayer burden in Grey Creek and Boswell. It should, because we're getting a unique service for very little money.
Yeah.
And it's being subsidized by the people, Windle and Greenville in particular, which is, Windle's a pretty good tax base. The rest of the money that you wouldn't tax in Canyon, Lister, wherever there will be at sea, town will have to adjust their contracts because they do need this money. And they will just build it into the contract price. Again, as Councillor Dumas pointed out, we got lots to talk about.
Yeah.
I can't explain to taxpayers how we're in this conundrum right now, except it's just too much else going on in life. And so now we're looking at a $22,000 boost in taxation in 1 year for a service that in my mind is the wrong service for delivering what we need. Next year.
Yeah.
I'll be sitting back there and be asking why you not change this.
So really, you're saying, let's just, we pointed out what the opportunities are and the pros and cons. But we're just going to say it's okay, we'll just carry on, but yeah, we can't explain this.
I'm stuck if I can, Chair. I need you three to say we need to repeal this. Because I don't think we've ever come to the point where you guys said you need this repealed and replaced. Because I can't do that on my own. And Tom Dool has gone as far as he can, showing me models where I will just go to area residents and say, guess what? You need these services, and there's a more fair way to provide them.
Well, and I asked you earlier, I said, what is the forum for us to actually say we wish to repeal? Because I know you talk about it a lot, and I'm getting better to understand what it is that you're talking about.
And that's an answer.
Thank you through the chair. If I can offer this just as for consideration by the directors, prior to repealing a service like this, there could be a benefit of directing staff to conduct a review of the service in the same way that you're describing, Director Jackman, that Tom has been doing. that would also help us establish what's the level of service, similar to what Town of Creston is establishing through the new committee, saying this is the level of service that we want. Then we can talk about what's the right structure and what's the right financial model in order to deliver that. So we could be lining ourselves up to have a robust model and the right financial model that's supporting that at the same time. So it's something that I'm thinking about just more broadly for the RDCK Fire Services over the next coming years, but that's also a direction that could be considered.
So next, Valley Services, at some point, we should throw it on the agenda for Valley Services. This is not in form right now to.
No, but I think it should go through the Fire Services Advisory Committee and then report back to Valley Services Committee. So that the in-depth discussion is in that committee. So that's what you focus on. We focus on so much here. And
So that's our path forward.
I would say that's our path forward, is to examine that through the Fire Services Advisory Committee. So that you could have discussion just based on the fire services rather than, again, here where we have a bit of a shotgun approach. I think because there's so much on our plate, so.
Director Jacqueline, reasonable?
Yeah, I'm just not sure when that committee will formally be established. But we'll know in March, hopefully, cross my fingers.
Yeah.
There's a timeline for that, because town can't create a committee making us part of it.
Yeah.
It's like the cemetery, there's some steps here. This is much more impactful than the cemetery select.
And can I suggest it's more of a spinning our wheels approach than we've had in the past as we establish this, or at least that's the intent and design of it, so.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, so we're on to S.
So then we go on to Service 157, Emergency Plan, Creston in areas A, B, and C. I don't think we see a radical increase there, do we?
Yeah, basically 2% increase is,
Yeah.
pretty good job.
So what is that paid for?
Guess we can let Dan answer that, perhaps. Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you through the chair. Director Vandenberg, can you specify which portion you're asking of what it pays for, like the service in general, or do you have a specific?
Well, areas, Creston A, B, and C are being requisitioned 300 and some odd thousand, $350,000-ish dollars. And of that, I gotta get to the right document here. Of that, contracted services takes 110, and then transfer to consolidated services is 250. So what does that mean? What is that money for?
Thank you. Through the chair. So there's three things that are being paid for out of this service. And it's one that's a little bit more complicated because we do go to requisition on behalf of Town of Creston for their emergency management, their emergency program coordinator. As well, there's a component of victim services that gets paid for. So that's the second one. So emergency program coordinator for Town of Creston, victim services, and then a transfer that goes to A101, which is emergency management for the regional district. So, and which area were you asking for? Who pays for, or how much goes to which? So there's 250, I'll just speak to it and see if it answers. So that is transferred to emergency management program for the RDCK is 250,167 or 68. For the town of Creston, there's 78,413 of that goes as a transfer. You see captured as part of the contracted services. And there's also 32,938 that gets transferred as part of the contracted services for victim services. So that total of 111,351 in contracted services gets transferred for the Creston EPC and victim services.
EPC coordinator. So why do they need to coordinate areas A, B, and C?
So they are, I think this is a legacy expense. So it used to be that Town of Creston was part of the RDCK Emergency Management Service since, I'm going to say 2024. I might have my date wrong, but I think it's 2024. They're no longer part of our service. However, we still, the 78,413 is like a in and out. So we collect requisition, but we give it to Town of Creston that for their emergency program coordinator, and they only coordinate emergency management within the jurisdiction of the Town of Creston. So not like there's coordination in terms of interagency coordination like we would normally do between jurisdictions, but they're a Town of Creston staff.
So can I ask you, Dan, that meeting that we have every so often with a number of people, emergency services, that John used to host, does that come out of this budget as well? This gathering of people who just sit around the table and say, these are what we've been doing, but no real action comes out of that? Like, step forward action? It's just more of a conversation piece. So is that funded out of this?
So that meeting is the emergency program committee or working group meeting. So also an EPC meeting that is funded through RDCK Emergency Management. So when we're looking here, that's the $250,168 transfer that goes to A101. And the purpose of that meeting.
It's a lot of money. Go ahead.
So the purpose of that meeting is around coordination and relationship building between agencies. So the primary driver is about learning and building relationships. So it's not necessarily where you're going to see action coming from. That'll often happen outside of that meeting, and sometimes it'll come back to that meeting depending on what those actions are.
And so what I'm hearing is you're saying 250,000 of that transfer, that's 59,701, goes to getting together every so often in terms of relationship building.
Sure, it might be handy if you pulled up A101. Our $250,000, along with 4 times that, because we're almost a quarter of the RP, even though we're only 4 of 20. Is $1 million transfer into this fund, along with $1.7 million in grants last year, other external contributions, several hundred thousand, 7, paying a huge cohort of salaries, not just that meeting, paying for things like there's more than 100,000 to IT every year under that, general admin fees. So if you go to A101, you can see how complex that is, because our emergency management system has a lot of baked-in costs in technology. And these external costs, that $1 million it's pulled in from the, our $250,000 and the others, that's paying for a very broad service. It's not just the local coordination. So A101 has 20 line items in it that's beginning to break down what those expenditures are.
Okay, I see. I'm looking through it now.
But it was easier to put it all under A101. Because then you can see, to me, the order of magnitude of just things like technology is a huge part of it. It's not just people. People are a big part, but a lot of it is all this other contracted technology.
And if
Go ahead,
and I just disappeared. And thanks for the clarification, Director Jackman. Yes, so A101 accounts for all the emergency program, the RDCK emergency program staff. So that's 3 PCs, myself, we've got wildfire mitigation folks that work for that, flood mitigation folks. So Nora Hannon, who's part of CVFMWG, also works on that, is part of that. The coordination of interagency. So I call that all the preparedness work that the regional district does. That has to do with interagency coordination, training together, practicing together, establishing agreements on how we're going to work together, as well as that response readiness. So everything to do with the Emergency Operations Center within the regional district in terms of equipment, preparedness, training, and just that ongoing maintenance that we need to be doing. The administrative costs as well that we have to negotiate agreements, contracts, procurements, financial support, HR support, that's all part of A101 as well. And then any recovery-based work in terms of preparedness recovery. So any frameworks that we need to be doing, any planning, hazard risk assessments, and then supporting the community. So anything that's not cost recoverable from the province when it comes to emergency management and response and recovery is billed through A101. And that one I think I presented in, I want to say October, maybe October or November at the board.
Thank you for that. Every time we have these conversations, it starts to get clearer, clearer and clearer. And because this is not just a set of financials that you guys are used to seeing at Town of Creston, right? These services, these silos of services, they are tough to understand.
Yeah.
How the flow of money goes.
Right, Mr. Chairman. Does that also include property assessments, grants that are given to property owners to do fire mitigation?
So within A101, there are, at a glance, I've got 7 grants or 7 large programs that are grant funded that are running within A101. One of those programs is UBCM's CRI Fire Smart program. And through the Fire Smart program, where we get, let's say, roughly $750,000 annual, we're able to, part of that program is a rebate program that gives those grants to depending on availability. And so that part's grant funded though.
Are we content with all that?
A lot we can do about it, to be honest.
No,
We're catching up to changes in legislation every year.
yeah.
Every year.
And again, these aren't radical increases in our budget years or the 5-year plan.
So really, this is core service.
Yes.
This is need to have versus like to have. Very much.
Yeah.
No, that's good.
Okay.
Thank you for the discussion. This is, we could have done this for years ago.
Yeah, we never get a chance to do this, so good to have this type of meeting. Let's move to service 164, decking areas B and C. Again, modest budget, modest increase. I don't know if anything else you want to ask.
So my, what I can B and C. So this is gotta be the Goat River Residency Association, I believe 164, yes. So what I can tell staff is that it appears I've been working pretty closely with this group. They're redoing their bylaws. They are bringing in a budget program. We know that the money that RDCK is holding back from them is around that $44,000 mark, which Director Tierney and I will advise RDCK to transfer that money to them upon their AGM and their acceptance of their budget. The other piece is that I'm going to guess that taxation requisition will probably be 0 for 2026 for that service. I say that because I kind of know what they're planning on doing for projects, what they have available to them, where they want to get to. And I think that fiscally they're looking pretty good, which is why I'm suggesting that I don't think there's going to be a taxation request for 2026.
They've built up an internal surplus themselves, haven't they?
Yeah.
Accumulated this.
Yeah.
It's not giving. Yeah, good job. Kelly's doing a fantastic job getting this group up to speed. And this requisition, yes, they do have a lot of money to start doing maintenance. It hasn't been done in years. But I wonder if there is a substantial flood breakage in the dike. What I'm getting at is this money, this is basically for maintenance. If there was a major incident, Dan, would you know, would the province come in with major money to repair dikes? This isn't meant for major repairs, imagine, because otherwise you'd want to keep the requisition the same. When it builds up and to be able to respond to a major incident.
Can you elaborate, Dan?
Yes, thank you through the chair. If we kind of extrapolate, we had an incident where there was the dike that was, let's say the dike released, that would be considered as part of the Emergency Disaster Management Act. It would meet the definition of an emergency. And therefore we'd be able to get any response cost would be cost recoverable from the province in terms of responding. So, and response in this case would be until the incident is mitigated. When it comes to rebuild costs, we'd be getting into disaster financial assistance. And from a disaster financial assistance standpoint, I don't have the ratio in my mind right now because they're updating it, but my memory is that 80% is cost recoverable, 20% would be at the expense of the local authority.
Okay, thank you. That's, yeah, what I wanted to know. I don't know if the Fraser Valley is getting that cost recovery to them, but at any rate, so this is for basically maintenance, and I would agree, Ellie, that they've got a pretty good chunk of money in there for maintenance work.
So just further, if I may, for the benefit of Dan, so what the group is now doing is getting clarification from Danielle Grafton of the province, specifically on private owned versus public owned dike portion as to what authorities exist to the Goat River Residency Association in regards to maintaining and repairing breaches as it relates to privately owned versus publicly owned portions of the dike. So we're waiting for that response back, which then leads into part of their budget conversation at some point.
Good. Guess we'll go to service 174, cemetery, Creston areas A, B, and C.
Sure.
Chair, yeah, just.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
You're muted, yes.
You're unmuted.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Through the chair, is there any direction from the directors to change the current budget or leave it as is? Because our plan is to publish another consolidated budget either at the end of this week or early next week, or should we leave it as is until we get further direction in March?
I'm going to say you zero 2026 requisition 164.
Okay, through the chair, thank you.
Good. All right, let's get on cemeteries then.
Through the chair, everybody's got S-174 up.
Yep.
So based upon conversations with the town of Creston, they're the major grant in this service. And that's remaining flat this year. To note, Crawford Bay did not submit their paperwork to receive their $1,500. Director Jackman, I don't know if there's anything that you may know. We are carrying and have consistently carried $5,000 accumulated surplus, which is for this committee to, it's not used, we haven't used that in terms of smoothing out taxation. It's always been used as a general allocation that's there in case the committee wishes to do a financial amendment. And possibly one of the smaller cemeteries may have a particular project that they need to get done. To note that really the requisition increase this year is 100% due to the decrease in surplus. Other than that, it's a fairly straightforward budget. I don't know if there's any questions.
Director Jackman.
Yeah, thanks. So when we had the discussion at the town select committee on the cemetery, I made some suggestions about how we would use the interest from the perpetual care fund to flatten or offset taxation increases, because we'll never use it otherwise. It's the way I see it. And I think that was what was being done, and I haven't seen a adjusted budget come back. I kind of thought we might see the council the other day. So even though town isn't asking for increase right now, can I see an updated sheet since that select committee meeting? Have you assumed revenues from interest earned on the perpetual care fund will come into each year's operating revenues?
Should have stayed 5 more minutes, because it was the next thing on the schedule, the agenda on Tuesday. The decision made by council was to utilize surplus. And so keeping it flat to that 96,000 and to not utilize that interest. So the interest is gonna go back in and that care fund will continue to build. And so council made the decision to go and use the surplus for this year so that we didn't go up to the 106 is for the recommended. So it is in our, if it's helpful, it's in our agenda package. You can take a look at the report and so.
I opened it and didn't get back to it. I had meetings all through yesterday and things. But actually I have the town package open right in front of me.
So the report is in there and then the budget is in there.
So disappointing, council, this is a simple select committee of town where I thought there seemed to be some comfort level that we can't just keep putting money into this perpetual care fund that within generations will never, unless there's a huge change in the fee per burial plot, it will not do what it was intended to do. It is intended to pay for the maintenance of the site. And there's the opportunity to spend that interest every year for the maintenance of the site. Now, perpetual care fund will still build based on money that comes in from sale of plots. But the way we're doing it now, we are not using that fund whatsoever, potentially for generations, for the intended purpose, which is the ongoing perpetual maintenance of the site. So I thought we had consensus at the advisory circle level, and council overturned. Fine, you can do that. So you dug a hole in the budget by burning all the surplus that you're holding. Fine. When we get to fire services and this kind of committee of the something else, wow, we can't have that situation happen. We cannot have a consensus as to what is a good future direction of using money for what it's intended to be used for, as versus stuffing it away and digging a hole in the budget because it's turned over by council decision. That's totally unacceptable.
So
I don't know what to go from this.
the discussion that we had was, the intent of some of that money is to eventually get to a level of funding where we don't need to add to it because we'll have something we can work in perpetuity. And that was always the plan, and that plan is written into that. So we didn't want to change that because the length of time to get to that perpetuity would increase dramatically by changing that. So we wanted to get to it where actually the requisition will be much lower because we have built up this fund to do that stuff. And in the meantime, we're also looking at our service level there to see where there are ways we can economize. So we're doing two things that actually are working towards the future of managing this. That I'm not sure if you've accounted for that, but in our discussions, it was pointed out basically why we want to keep that fund going and adding to it rather than taking away and lengthening dramatically the amount of time it'll take to get to a level of funding where we don't have to add money to it. So we're talking about the future here. So again, you're most certainly welcome to disagree with that, but it seems like a sound future plan.
My difficulty is the future is too far. The money is intended to maintain the cemetery. The interest earnings is intended to maintain the cemetery, period. There's plan A or plan B. You can say you're gonna wait for this to be something that's sufficient to do it all. or you can recognize that you can use that money today. The conundrum is we didn't start the fund 50 years ago. So it disturbs me that the long-term plan here is too long, much too long, to see the benefit to the taxpayers. That we can be using the money now, and that's exactly the intention, to maintain the cemetery. So maybe it's an ideological thing, I don't know what, but I am disturbed that I thought there was consensus in the advisory. It's been flipped by council. Council can do whatever it wants. But when I sit with a commission, like EDC and the like, I take seriously their voice to the board. Take it very seriously. When I sit with an APHC, advisory plan, I take their voice extremely seriously when I make my recommendations, what I support the board. And here I see the long-term to be unrealistic vision of the future versus dealing with people's economic issues and pressures today. And we are allowed to help deal with those pressures, even if it's only $10,000 at a time, instead of saying there's some golden future out there. So it's almost an ideological or some difference we have here. But the part I find disturbing is I don't think council agreed to the consensus. So maybe we don't need this committee, this select committee. Maybe I will just speak my mind, what I feel is good for my constituents here. Because I don't know, is I put a lot of thought into, and I ask in advance to see the financial models, what we can earn. To me, it just seemed too many decades of waiting. So I don't need to sit in those conversations and believe I'm supported by the group and hear something else is decided. So we're not changing the budget this year, we'll have a hole next year. When town asks for more money next year, whether I'm sitting here or not, I might just shrug and say, well, now you get to take more interest finally out of that account. Because the future is too far away on this.
Dr. Dumas, I think you were going to.
Yes, I'm checking the report, so I can just give you that.
But as I said to you, there's a parallel process here, and one is to re-examine the level of service that we are giving the cemetery, to see how we can economize. And do we have to mow the lawn as often as we do? Do we have to check washrooms as often as we do? Can we change what we do seasonally? So while you're talking about this, the town is looking at ways to maybe affect the level of service in a way that will save some money here. So it's not just a singular process. You know, it is certainly debatable to say, well, it's too far in the future for us to say that this is doing any good. We could argue that all day, but by setting this up for a time where we don't have to allocate so much money towards it, still financial, a good sound financial planning. Of course, we don't reap the benefits as directors today or even as a town today, but we do in the future. And part of what we have to do is all of us sitting at this table is what happens in the future. What are we passing to the next directors and to our citizens as we go on? So again, we could argue that, but that is something that we sit at this table for. Go ahead.
Just to clarify that, so that the council directs staff to notify the regional district of Central Community that the required contribution to cemetery operations will remain unchanged for 2026 at $96,010. Further, that council directs staff to develop draft policies for use of cemetery fees, reserves, surplus, and commissions for council consideration at upcoming meeting. So that was staff is going to look into all the different suggestions that the cemetery select committee gave. From my understanding of asking questions of the difference between the cemetery select committee, which brings suggestions and recommendations to council, is that the fire advisory service would be a governing body. So that's my understanding between a governing body that would bring that before both RDCK board and then also the town of Creston. So that was my understanding, the two difference between the two advisories.
So between Tuesday and now, there's lots to do every day. And I have the agenda package saved here, it's 374 pages. So somebody, I'll read all 374, read my way through it, or if somebody wants to tell me later where I can find it on this agenda, leave it open on my desktop. I saved it the other day. I'd like to read the rest of the report, and just for now, we're good, I guess. Carry on.
I can through the chair to answer that. It's number 3 under the committee of the whole. So it's number 3 agenda item.
So that was, well, we're in the weeds, so the page number of 374. I'll dig it later.
Yeah, I could find it for you.
So my intention is not to belabor this. I think Director Jackman has put it on the table quite clearly. I'm a little bit surprised as well, but I will point out that I had requested a change to the minutes, the way they were circulated to us. Don't know if that look in the future, but we also had a conversation around the requisition of 20,000 annually that goes to the town of Creston, to which your staff did not understand how that money, where it comes from, for the purpose of where it comes from, because it was going to our funeral partners, who then were just giving it back to their customers. It was a subsidy. And so there is going to be some look into that for the future, because that looks like it's a draw of taxpayers' money from us as partners that ends up just going back to the users as subsidies. So that's an important part in this budget. It's only $100,000 budget I get, but kind of wonder the value of us putting our time together to sit in this committee. And we had all these conversations. We had all those conversations about what the future, the choices that we had and what we're trying to do and that sort of thing. So I will reflect what Director Jackman has said in this, and we'll have that conversation in the future.
Thank you. Through the chair, that was the direction to staff to develop the policy. So that's all within that. So that information will be coming back to the select committee and as well the council. So that is all in there. Directed staff to look into that 20% kickback and also the policies around surplus and reserves. So it's all within that one direction.
So another question I have, Mr. Chair, and just a reminder, we have a couple of recipients with their budget requests of 3,500 versus 1,500 and so on. Are these larger cemeteries? Why the discrepancy in the funding allocation between All Saints, Boswell, Crawford Bay, Great Creek, Lister? Yeah.
My opinion, it's random. I was the secretary treasurer for the Boswell Farmers Institute, and I put in a budget request every year based on what we actually plan to do. Take down hazard trees, replace fence, replace curbs around graves. We actually had a capital asset management plan 20-some years ago when I was in that position, which I stepped away from when I was elected because it's a conflict. They're random numbers. And I've asked before, and this is one of our action item lists, that we actually have a little better handle on this arm's length granting thing. That they now submit some kind of 5-year plan, but I still view it as random. Ranging from just by default, we got 35 last year, let's ask for that again. I'm sure if you wanted to spend 3,500 Boswell, I'd go up there and come up with how to make it prettier. And suggest the Farmers Institute at their AGM, which is in a week or so, ask for 3,500.
Dr. Judy. Yeah, because my question will kind of answer part of that for you. But Joe, I don't know if you can answer this for me. The Lister Cemetery budget's $3,500, which they pay their water connection to for the Lister water system, around $1,400. And the 5-year projection is to go up 20%, 20%. In the 5 years, it'll be double. And so they are asking for either be not part of the or to not have to pay their bill to the water lister system or to increase their budget, because basically in a few years, they'll be paying 3/4 of their budgeted amount here will be going towards water. And at the present time, they're doing a wonderful job of maintaining their cemetery. It's beautiful. They actually use some of this money to make improvements, little gazebo thing. And do you know whether their request for there he's bringing it up right there, basically. That shows a projection of their water bill exceeding their grant money over 5 years.
Yeah, so through the chair, what this seems to indicate to me is that the funding I don't know how they're balancing this piece off, but their funding is under what they're projecting their expenses to be. The water, you can see their projection there. So 2030, they're projecting that their water bill would be higher than their RDCK grant. It's a matter of philosophy, but I would say that in this case, it would be more prudent to be increasing their RDCK grant from the service and that they are charged their appropriate water rate. I think doing something on the water rate side opens up other conversations.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. That's great. Thank you for pulling it up fast there. I think it was just a couple of years ago where their water bill was more like $1,000, $1,200, and they were still able to do their maintenance to the quality they're doing it. But as you can see, if the strategy is to have them pay their water bill like everyone else, which I understand, yes, we'd have to increase their allocation accordingly.
I think in their submission, they also say that how much they do voluntarily because of these costs, right?
Yeah, their submission was quite clear. They're doing a lot of maintenance work, and right now for what we're giving them, they're making it work, but not in the long term.
Dr. Vandenberg there?
Thank you. So this conversation is a conversation around subsidy. What we don't know, based on those numbers, is how many plot sales has occurred. What is the revenue stream? Yes, I have a number. But on that revenue stream in terms of fees, what is it? Is there an alignment of fees from throughout our region that everybody is kind of charging and delivering the same level of service between one and another? Because I think that needs to be your baseline before we start, and in the future, start considering the requests for funding from RDCK. Because there is a user fee component here. And I know with the select cemetery, I have an understanding as to what the users would pay to have those services within that. And so therefore, a conversation around the cost of running that facility and these other matters are a little bit more clear. With the request from our external groups, there just doesn't seem to be a understanding of what it is that they're trying to do, what level of service they're providing, what the cost of services are. I think there needs to be some understanding that it's fairly consistent before we start. And I think going forward, when we look at this budget again, because right now it's well, just ask for money because we have in the past. Okay, I don't know that that's prudent.
Dr. Jackman?
I've suggested in the past that we invite representatives, all of these cemeteries, to sit in the same room. And I'll happily say, you're asking the taxpayer for random amounts of money. Interestingly, I see the one that Joe just showed us was using the interest from the perpetual care fund every year. Interesting to have them sit and say why. And I'd like to know the balance of their fund and when it was started. I'd like to know if they have a capital reserve, because I see $500 a year every year for equipment. But 20 years ago, I had the debate to buy a $200 nice lawnmower or $300 or $400 lawnmower. It was self-propelled because it's a hilly site in Boswell. So we spent a few more bucks. But we didn't ask for $500 a year for tools every year. You weren't buying the shovels and rakes and stuff and putting it in a shed. $500 worth every year. So I think what Director Vandenberg is speaking to, what are the actuals? Where's money going in the reserve? Because that's accountability. Not to say you budget something. Now, I also see they budgeted for a huge increase for burials. Demographics and trends and burials are dropping. So the price escalation must be extreme, more than double, triple, based on that quick looking at that chart. It'd be a good conversation to have as a group. So yeah, I fully agree. If we don't sit down with all these groups and ask them to have some kind of a baseline expectation, we're just issuing money randomly. And to quote Don from Kimberly, that's not good governance. And it resonates in my head the way he said that so many times in the past years. That's not good governance. We're not exercising good governance in this service.
So I just draw back to some of our first conversations as this group, elected officials. We talked about this. We talked about this with graveyards, cemeteries, and community halls, because we felt we're not getting adequate reporting back or adequate budget statements. And I think we're still at that same point. We haven't resolved that at all.
I would be proposing that we throw this onto an agenda item in Valley Services.
Yep.
To provide direction to staff, because I think we've talked about this
Yeah.
too many times now.
Yeah.
And
There's one direction to staff I could give right now, is to remove, Creston, that is a deeper, more significant relationship. So I would leave grants down to Creston on the page. I would put grants to other certified cemeteries in one line item. If we don't predetermine finance will issue checks in August, we collapse all that money to one line item. And between now and August, when we're asked to issue the checks, or finance says confirmed that we're going to send these grants out, we don't give this money out till we get it. We don't get it from the province till July or August. If we don't predetermine these amounts, we make it one line item. Grants to, and what is the proper word? Certified cemeteries? I don't know if Crawford Bay is a cemetery in good standing anymore. Now, I've gone to the registrar of companies before to look at some of our societies. It was amazing. I went to look at how many societies are decertified every year in this province. It's more than 100. Societies collapse. Entities are no longer authorized to take and hold our money. And if we don't know that they are, now I know we ask for these reports, this and that. So there's two levels here that we say grant is held a lump sum for certified or eligible cemeteries. And then that we have that conversation before we issue checks in August. And then we reapportion that lump of money between entities that sat in the same room and agreed that it's fair. Whether or not you pay more for water or use more water, go on a water meter, harsh year, and water the grass less. And when you water the grass less, you cut the grass less. Go to the ball field in Greendale. That's exactly what we did. It's green right now. I was there yesterday, Joe. It really looks pretty good. Better than it's looked for a long time. I want to go out there with a bag of seed and dormant seed to think. I still might. It's this year you can do it. But we need that conversation. So I would recommend to staff that we collapse those several grant items into a single line. And there's no presumption that we're done with this conversation until August.
Through the chair,
Go ahead,
if
Joe.
you wished, so I would just suggest this. These grants are not big. Most of these, just looking at the reporting here, just be careful about how much burden you put on to volunteer groups to continue doing this. I would just think that you should just take a moment just to think about that. I do think that, possibly having them do a short presentations, but none of these documents are complicated in their measure. None of the amounts that they're showing as balances are huge. Like, I'm looking at All Saints, which is the other larger grant. They have $15,000 in the bank. It seems that the money that they get, they spend on their services. The present system of giving out the grants was done to be effective and efficient. If we change that process, it'd be very good to give direction to finance to take them off of the financial service grant list so that payment is not made automatically. Yeah, I don't know if that's the right way, but like there's certain processes that are in place that need to be changed in order to stop it, to make sure it doesn't happen by accident. So I could definitely lump them all together. We should think about how it is that they're going to be approved. But
Okay,
I'm
well,
not sure if
Yev
is there, but I think you should do a direction to remove them off the the financial service grant list if you wish to have an approval process before they go out.
So I'm relying on staff to point these out to me. Because I don't know how incumbent it is for staff to work through all this. What you're hearing from us is to have a conversation with them so we understand what their accountability is and where we need to be in order to decide how to support them. If they don't come and have a chat with us, or if you staff don't suggest here are the mechanisms to encourage that conversation, then it'll just continue. So.
Yeah, we wanted financial reports from them. Lister has been good with.
They have,
Lister was-
we never see it. We never see it.
Yeah, we do need to see it.
Lister was in arrears as far as their reporting goes, and if you might recall, we canceled, or the recommendation of others to me, that we canceled their grant a couple of years ago.
Yep.
And it took quite a bit of work to get that reinstated. And they were not selling many plots. It's a fairly full cemetery down there. And if I am to give a proper recommendation on this, I would say their grant should go up to $4,000 because their water bill is going up fast. And they're not able to keep up with the cost of maintenance.
So I want to add in here that the benefit to Area C taxpayers is don't know, really don't know. Chances are Area C will be part of the Creston Cemetery sort of thing. The idea of the opportunity for us is we have the ability to grant money to these outfits. It doesn't have to come through taxation in this regard. I can choose to put money towards any one of these if I wish from Area C. And I think I would rather do that if we can't come to consensus that all I want to see is these groups come in, tell me your story, tell me what you're trying to do, where you're going to go, so that I can evaluate whether or not it is good for Area C to invest tax dollars money into it. Other than that, if there's an expectation because the water bills go up, that's a cost of doing business. I don't know what their user fees are. I don't know how many plots they're selling, that sort of thing. Certainly the area directors can give grant money to help in that regard. And so all these need to be a part of the overall conversation. This is not $100,000, I get it. But this is foundational. This is correcting, this is the opportunity to have a discussion on something that's relative to our community and then come up with a standard policy and move on. And so we can deal with larger things at hand, so.
Having said that, again, do you want staff direction that we have this as an agenda, Creston Valley Services, to have that further discussion, but also have staff request financial reports from the various sanitaries that have not submitted a report. That be along the lines of what we want.
I had noted that down. I was gonna do that in my own capacity, but that's, I would support your.
Yeah, because we might as well do it as a group rather than in your own capacity, and then have that conversation. And again, get some idea of where these cemeteries are as far as their own finances, whether they built up surpluses. Obviously, Lister wouldn't, but we need to know that because we keep granting them money without knowing that.
I thought this was gonna be a quick conversation.
So nothing,
It's the minimum. Could Joe forward us his reports he's holding right now?
yeah,
And then the request direction to staff would be be more workshop, arrange a joint meeting with a single representative of each one of these cemeteries. So we can discuss budgets.
okay. Take that as a direction to staff. Okay. So Joe, you can't retire because you have to do this.
I'm sorry, I'm retiring, Chair, do you, like, there is an important piece here because there is a process that's already in place. So I just want to make sure that what I put in the budget, because finance follows this. So am I the preference is to lump the grants together, to not have them on the financial service grant sheet, to be able to make a recommendation from a Creston Valley Services meeting as to what the grant amounts are for 2026. Is that correct, Leonard?
I think so.
Yeah, we think so.
I don't know what that financial service grant thing is that you keep referring to. I don't know, I understand the mechanism of it, but it sounds like.
Every year, we have a list of people who we plan at arm's length to give money. And when we put in a lineup that specific amount of money, finance is authorized to spend that money. And automatically in August, you'll see the list again. Say, are you sure this is the list? If we don't like the list, we think there's a problem, you gotta pull something. But if you've approved in a line item of a budget, that entity to get that amount of money, and that, they're on that list, checks quoted on this.
Like it's reflected here.
Exactly those numbers.
Okay.
In my mind, if we collapse those numbers, finance doesn't have authorization for any specific number. However, they're still on the list, as Joe said, and we'll be asked about that list in July. Is this list still valid? Finance will have a gap in your information if we don't have an amount. I think Joe's concern is by default, the money might go out anyway.
Yep.
But we have from now till July.
It's more of a practice item that, these are not big dollars, but it's just getting a handle on the practice of. Just leave that.
Yeah, we got your hand up, go ahead.
Yes, through the chairs, there are a few steps, even though it's in the budget. So the finance puts together a list of all the financial service grants that are in the budget. Those are gathered, I think, in June and are put in front of the board for approval. So at that point, any one of those items could be removed if the director is aware of a reason not to make that grant. As part of our grant policy as well, we require all these grantees to provide us with their annual statements. And we generally don't release the grants until we have that, and so we track those internally as well. So there's a couple steps before their finance pays those amounts. To Joe's point, if they're all bundled together and there's not one payee, then that would have to be addressed on its own, authorized on its own, and treated outside our normal financial service grant process.
I think that would bog us down somewhat if we did it that way.
Well, if I may, and I'm just gonna throw out there because this is the opportunity to discuss. it's great, it's good to know that it's gonna come before us in, say, June. But at the board is not a good time to have it presented to us for the first time. Because we can't ask these type of questions in June. This type of engagement, this discussion should be occurring so that we know what's gonna happen in June. So I don't know in the past, at least I don't recall that I had a really good understanding. By the time it showed up on the board agenda, which there is no time to talk and deliberate, that we actually had adequate conversation. That's why we're doing this now. We never did this the past couple of years. This is the first time we've ever done this. So I just want to make sure that I like the idea of having it all brought before us in June, but I hope that we've had this type of conversation to understand, yep, I recall that, we've had this, we've talked about this, and life is good.
Yeah, so we have, basically have a staff direction there, I assume now. Good as we can get. And I have to remind you, we're only at page 936 here. Goodness. Can we move that to Service 186, refuse disposal for East Subregion, Creston, areas A, B, and C?
So I did have a thought or two on this, and I see Uli emailed me a while ago. He copied, Stuart, I guess. Whether or not he had to sit through, because we've had conversations. And I said, I don't think so. But what we see happening is, big conversations about cost recovery and user pay for residual waste and the like, particularly tipping fees. And then we realized we are subsidizing recycling, we're subsidizing organics for good reason, because if we go over the tonnage as a self-attenuating landfill site, we have a whole other set of capital cost requirements, which we may have to pay anyway. We'll see what the current Minister of Environment says when they get around to it. So we set these targets that we would increase tipping fees, and those are long-term conversations because it impacts municipalities more than anybody else. You guys already sent your utility bills out. And we also set long-term targets. We're going to inflate to cover some theoretical amount of subsidy through requisition. And say 8% is a number. Now a number 9.2 shows up. You say, well, if we knew that costs were getting out of hand a few years ago, then we'd have maybe increased our tipping fee, because where is the cost out of hand? Where is this going? We don't reset those conversations. We don't redo this study. We don't redo all of that cost recovery exercise because it's expensive and takes a lot of time. So we just throw the extra money under acquisition. So we're thinking we're establishing a long-term balance, long-term objectives. And every time something goes out of whack a little bit, we just pump more into the requisition. We don't need to increase to the 9.2. We can just hold the requisition increase at 8. And we can keep holding it at 8 for years, because the timing of our design for this year, and I wrote all the numbers down, I don't have to go through them all, is uncertain. And in 2025, we didn't spend all the money on construction capital. We had 2.77 million and actual 700,000 for actual 1/4. And this year we're projecting 4.42 million in construction. This probably not very realistic because we haven't got any designs in front of us. This is all highly theoretical. Our cash flow in waste management is about as accurate as a cash flow in interior health. We all know how that cycle goes. We put millions of dollars aside and then they have delays and delays. We always have more cash from health authorities than we need. So it's a little philosophical, but I'd like to hold to the 8% tax increase, which was based on all these studies. The net difference in taxation is like 14 or 16,000. It's very little. But just hold with that number, and all the slack and difference can be taken out by contributions to or from reserve. And projections on capital per year, what's going to be spent, are going to change wildly by the $1 million mark. It's not going to change by 10,000 on our capital expectation by the end of 226. I'd be surprised if we didn't see $1 million variance in capital because of the complexity of doing any work around So ones like this, I just like to leave what we told the taxpayer we're gonna escalate 8%, leave it at 8%. Not boost it because of all these theoretical changes. Yeah, we have a real boost in the cost of the landfill operations contract, and that's gonna hit us hard in the year. And when that operations contract cost hits us hard, we need to increase the tipping fee. But instead, we're pre-increasing the taxation. They're gonna compound that with future year increases. That's the wrong direction. So we should just leave the taxation at the prescribed 8% increase. And we'll have a much better realistic conversation when we come to tipping fee conversation this September. That was the only little tweak I wanted to do. And we all remember this in September.
Can we agree to that here and now?
It'd be a recommendation to staff to adjust the requisition increase to 8% above last year. And Uli did come out with this. Because I don't think it makes a difference in terms of where we end up in the end of the year for money. But it makes a difference that we are still focusing on cost recovery when we get to September, not making up all the difference with taxes.
I'm in agreement with that. Going back to my notes on here, and I see where the other central and the west are in comparison. And yes, it's not apples to apples. I understand that, but what not to belabor with Director Jackman, but one of the other things we talked about was the wilderness cleanup free amount. And I don't remember where we ended up. That was a $25,000 ask. I thought it was tabled, but we never, did we give direction in our portion of that contribution for that work? Or did we decide that that's going to be a director grant opportunity? Can somebody remind me what we ended up doing with that program to go out and clean up homeless encampment areas is really what it is, by a group of volunteers who just need a little bit of monetary help to do that. Where did we end up with that?
Uli's there.
Uli, can you answer that?
And the 25 grand was a total amount between the three, if I remember correctly. I think our portion was 5 grand and then 10 and 10, if I remember correctly. If that helps.
Yeah. I'm not 100% certain. I don't see it in the grant line item, but I thought we left it in here. Maybe contracted services.
So while we're looking into that, once again, it's 5 grand, I think, for East. It's not a real big number, but we did not give direction on that. Let's just assume that it was going to remain in. And then I agree with Director Jackman's 8% cap.
So we're not finding.
I don't-
You got it? Go ahead.
I don't have an answer for that. I was under the impression too it was in the budget, but I haven't found the line item that it refers to.
Yeah, it was when Amy made the presentation, she had taken the time to highlight some of the key differences, and that was a highlightable line, if I remember. I just can't find it on my computer right now. I don't know if it's stuck in eScribe somewhere.
Sure. Given our shortage of time here, I think more importantly, what's Uli's comments on the 8% increase instead of 10?
Right. Good point.
My comment would be, yes, it is doable. The numbers are big enough that the $60,000 that we are talking about here is my guess around that number. Coming from reserves does not make a decisive difference. It's just something that we carry forward in future discussions. We have a lot of unknowns coming towards us, from the septic receiving area to our compost operations. So there's a lot of movement. The capital cost, once we have tendered it for the berm enclosure project. So there's a lot of unknowns. $50,000 or $60,000 difference coming from reserves is not going to make a decisive difference. It just enters the discussion in the fall, what gap, if any, we have financially.
Can we make that recommendation and go
Yeah.
forward?
I was just gonna say that in the interest of time, we can make that recommendation to cap it at 8%, I believe. Revisit tipping fees and things when we have to, and in the meantime, somehow, somewhere, find that $25,000 wilderness cleanup grant, so we know where that is. Then we can move to service 193, public library.
191, sir.
Right? Am I moving too fast here? Oh, 191 now. Service 191, museum and archives. Director Vandenberg.
Yeah, if I may. So the request, the increased request this year was to bring on a staff, a tech, for a certain allocation in terms of time. It was not a full 1.0 FTE. It was a portion. And then the other part of the budget request was for the repurposing or the renovation, the remodeling of a restroom. The reason I understand that is that I went to the museum, I wanted to see what it was that they were wanting to work on, the project. I did see it, and it was really just a small space to be able to make it handicap efficient. I would say that there already is provision for handicap for wheelchair at the museum. This then would have been the bathroom that was down lower in one of the original parts of the museum. I don't know that it would be the amount that they're asking for would be adequate. It's a complete remove a number of walls and do some concrete work and so on and so forth. I don't know that that would be an adequate amount of money. I guess that would be a nice to have as opposed to need to have. Because the congregation area that traditionally the ladies that do all their sewing and kind of thing, they use that room. That is automatically a good place for handicapped wheelchair people to utilize that restroom. So I would suggest that I'm comfortable with the request to add that part-time person to assist Tammy. But I'm not thinking that renovation for the restroom is necessary. Perhaps that's something that they can fundraise through the community to do. I think that's just a pretty big job. I'm not an expert, but I just did rebuild my house, build a whole new home. That would be a nice to have versus need to have. Then that's my thoughts on the request for museum.
Will you go ahead? You have your hand up, so I don't know if you're.
Yeah. I did go back, look at the documents that we reviewed with the directors at the last budget meeting. Yes, there was a $5,000 item under grants for a portion of the backcountry wilderness cleanup support. That is obviously removed in the version that you have before you. I'm not sure if that was the feedback we got from you guys, and Amy removed it as part of that, but it is removed. It is not included.
We can fund that at any time with a financial plan amendment if they come up with a firm program, so. Within,
Or director grants.
within a $5 to $8 million budget, depending on capital, we can easily or through direct grants.
I think that's where we landed anyway, after the discussion was grants. Yeah.
Back to the museum chair, do we know the breakdown? I can't find the numbers between the additional assistant versus the one-time washroom renovation project. I can't find Tammy's.
I have the presentation open in front of me.
Okay.
And what it is, but I can't find that renovation in there. CPI increased $5,000. Rising facility operation costs in excess of CPI was $5,000. Increase incremental costs moving from a part-time to a full-time position. Okay, from part-time to full-time, $25,000. So that's $35,000 asked. That's increase in core funding. But I cannot find that other piece of business. Maybe I'm wrong, but no, I'm not, because they gave me a tour of what it was.
And I'm just wondering if they would be eligible to apply for an accessible BC grant for that washroom, as we have with our washroom at Millennium Park. You know, town got a grant, I think, for $20,000. So I think that our recommendation could be that, as you said, fund the requests for their additional staff and suggest that perhaps they apply for an grant through Accessibility BC for the washroom.
Through the chair. I do have it up on the screen. It's right, it's on, it's on, if you're looking at the addenda of the meeting in December, I believe the page number is 30. That amount does not look like to me. So here, so these are the, it's difficult to see how this flows through this sheet. They're showing that they had a $50,000 grant estimated for the washroom. So just so it looks like here is $50,000 coming in on page 28. On page 29 is 56,000, or sorry, page 30 is 56,085 going out. The grant increase, the only thing that I'm just a little bit hesitant about, Director Vandenberg, without talking to them, is that I'm not sure that much of this increase is actually attributable to that capital work.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're right now that I get a chance to refamiliarize myself through that presentation materials.
I don't know if it's helpful having it up on the screen, or else I can pull that down.
It's not actually, we can't see it.
We can't see it.
But mine up. And, but I think, I guess generally speaking, if the increase is 5.5 and 25, which I don't know that that's what staff is inputted into this financial plan. The 5.5 is CPI, operating above CPI and moving from a part-time to full-time. I'm okay with that. Now that I understand that CBT might be the ones that have been requisitioned for the washer work.
Yeah, through the chair, what is entered into the budget is as per page 28 of their presentation, and just under municipal and regional revenues on that page, it says RDCK operating grant.
And the amount?
As per the budget, 169,538.
That doesn't tell me.
Oh, sorry, maybe I misunderstood the question, Director Vandenberg.
Okay, so their requisitions last year were 133 and some change, and the ask this year is 170. So what's the math? 37,000.
Yeah, I wrote it down here somewhere, the increase, so 28% increase in requisition.
And through the chair, what they've identified it as a 2.2% annual increase plus $35,000.
Okay.
That's what it says in their presentation from December.
No, that's not correct. Their presentation says 5,000 for CPI, 5,000 for operating over CPI, and 25,000 for a part-time to full-time. The total is 35,000.
Yeah.
And I'm good with that, 35 grand.
What's our consensus here? We good with that?
Well, we are showing the 35 plus, as Joe says, the 2.2. There's that extra little bit on this sheet now. I think to meet the level of service, the staff increase is gonna have to be there. It's a huge jump, 28%.
And what is the change to service?
Well, it's to have the staff to continue to provide, sounds like current level of service reasonably. The impression it's a lot of paid service right now. We get interesting historical things at all kinds of events, history of whatever, working with the history of hockey, history of farming, history of establishment of this and that. I guess the question will be when you go to the public, are they interested in having that kind of access to the historical information or not? Because without the paid positions, that's a big part of, I think, what we get out of the Museum and Archives function. It's not just stuff that you walk around and look at. It's pulling the stories and recaps. We can have that end, say because there's no staff. You can speak to in a public presentation. But I think the message was that staff is needed.
I think we already have agreed here. Their request is justifiable for what they need. And I believe we can support it that way. And I think part of the request also is the transition from the director, as she retires, to having a staff member that gets up to her knowledge level. And I think that was one of the reasons that they also wanted this increase in staffing, to have a smoother transition when she retires, which is not that far away. So, as I said, I do believe that we agree that it's justifiable, that we have, and I think when the public questions that, I think we should be able to articulate that this is a very justifiable request. I hope we can.
That's an explanation that I could support. That was an explanation that I could support, but, there's too much and there's not too many pieces of, history coming at them.
Well, we also know that there's a lot of work coming down the pipe that we can't talk about yet.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, so again, in the interest of time, we're good with the request that you said 35,000, but it's actually 37,000, I think.
That's the small inflationary increase added.
Okay. That will be our instruction then, and we'll move to service test 193, the public library.
So through the chair, there are two sheets for the public library. There's one with just what the 5-year plan was. So the library did two budgets, one with the 5-year plan as we had in 2025, and one with their suggestion for an increase. And so in your package, you have both of those options and the library's presentation in it. The one thing that I did want to go over that is not about the library's presentation, but just to note that I just did put some information down about the estimated reserve balance, what the expenses are projected over the next 5 years. Craig and I worked quite a bit on this for the asset management, capital, and planning expenditures for the physical building. And then how much of that funding every year is, excuse me, funded by requisition. So those pieces are there as just additional information. Note, and so I just do need direction on which option you want presented in your, in the budget.
Okay, Director Jackman?
So closing the Friday was a tough thing and we weren't sure how it would turn out, but I think we've had the library staff and or board report back that they haven't lost a huge amount of users. The hours and people coming through the door are not down very much. People have adjusted. So I don't want to go backwards on that right now. If people can adjust their schedule and still get what they need or want through the service with a lesser burden on the taxpayer, I'm good with it.
They're also,
On that one item, I have a separate item to talk about.
they're also looking at a different way to fund, reopening on Fridays that does not involve our contributions. And I respect them for that, and I hope they're successful with that. So, but I would agree that we continue down the path that we established last year. And, I just want to hear the consensus here. Director Church, good?
I haven't talked yet. I'm still listening.
I'm waiting for you to talk.
Yeah, but totally separate item, so I just thought it
Go
was
ahead.
culture.
I've done a lot of work on this, so I'm open to hearing what others are saying.
Should I do my one simple item then?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was belaboring our A 122 contribution. So today, there's $24,000, 23,973 proposed to go into our asset management pot of money, which is a pretty big pot of money for this year. First off, I think take 20 or 25% of that, put it to S100, like I talked about before. It's not a complete asset or building under the library service A193. So whatever the footprint says. And I was hoping all my talking last time would lead to maybe thinking about how realistic is this. I don't think between this building, this rec center and the library, we don't have a need for that division or department yet. We don't have consultants online. We have a huge amount of work projected for this year that I don't think is going to happen realistically. So I was hoping to see if there's an updated projection of when the work is going to happen. So I'd say take the $24,000, put a quarter of it or 20% of it to S100, and then should we see some adjustments in the time frame? Now, maybe the library is doable. I still think we should draw the building using internal resources. Sounded like our one project manager said, buy me a CAT program. These are simple things to do. It's driving the train, driving the bus, I realize. But this would be a great test case. So split some of the money S100. Maybe we can do this year. If we don't do the whole big rec center at the same time, maybe we do this first and see the value of drawing the building and understanding it better before we hire consultants to start jumping into our other buildings. So curious if there's been.
So through the chair, I won't answer the S100 conversation. I understand where Director Jackman's coming from on shared use of that facility and the 20% S100. But as far as the 20,000 for the facility condition assessments, that is in combined with the 60,000 for this facility, 60 for the Nelson facility, and 60 for the Castlegar facility, and that is transferred to A122 because they will be leading that work. And we will, Trish and I will act as the owners of that particular scope of work, given that we are technically the owners of those facilities. So that is in progress. I believe until the budget is approved, we can't tender any services yet. So that's why that hasn't progressed. But the goal, and certainly comments Director Jackman made last meeting about a method that we could add to that scope of work for the consultant was shared with PM. To integrate that as part of that. But we are still intending to look at those 4 facilities as a go forward plan. You'll notice that in this particular budget that the capital expenditures after 2027 are 0. And that's because we aren't confident with any previously done studies that would inform a capital investment plan. We do know that the air handler needs work, and we're designing engineering for this year and looking at replacement for next year for the library. And that's a similar story in S226 in Nelson and S224 in Creston with the rec facilities. Those capital numbers are just placeholders until this bigger study is done.
So all the money will be spent this year?
Through the chair, we,
Through
the chair, yeah, so through the chair, if it's $200,000 combined between all those
Yep.
4 services, 5 services, sorry. Then yeah, sorry, it is 4 services, but then yeah, we intend to have a report in the fall, early winter that will inform budgets from 2027 and forward. And that'll be also part of the conversation for the S224 conversation.
Okay, so all I'm looking for is the S100 split out. The rest of the numbers stand, that's fine.
Okay, so my question to staff is, on the financial draft of S193, line 57010 is calling for 587,000 to be allocated to the Creston Library. Their budget has requested 792,000. How do I reconcile those two numbers? In your mind, how did their request for 792 and in the budget is 587? What am I missing here? What is, I can't reconcile that.
Through the chair, if you were to look at page 13, you'll see there's 2 budgets, including
92.
Friday and Friday closures.
Five days a week.
No, I get that. I'm going with the Friday close scenario.
Yeah,
So that's
another
5,653.
I was just showing Director Vandenberg, because I haven't opened the other sources of funding for the
Yeah.
library to make up the 7.
So their request for 2026 is 587 from RDCK.
Correct.
Yeah, and that's there's 2 budgets. One has 587,653 as a
Okay,
request, and one has 663,177.
okay. All right, thank you for helping me reconcile that. And so now I'm in line with that. On 2 occasions, we've asked for some information from the library. And both times we have not gotten that. So a year ago, we asked about levels of services. We did not get a response back. The last meeting that we had with them, actually the 2 meetings prior, because they weren't here last meeting, I wanted to know what the difference was in terms of services provided based on the monies received on Castlegar versus Creston. And I provided a lot of data that showed the comparisons between the 2. My concern is that Castlegar is operating at less money or at the same money as the taxpayers are paying in RDCK from Creston to Castlegar, but they're open 6 days a week versus 4 days a week with Creston for the same money. So at what point in time are we going to have a conversation around the levels of services and the benefit to our taxpayers in the area? We seem to walk past that all the time. And so that's my concern with the request on the funding. And I understand, sitting on the board now, I understand where they're trying to go with trying to open up Friday, but I got to go back to a fundamental question on the level of service compared from one community to the other. And I know that there's differences, but there's not that much difference between them.
So my understanding from our librarian is that these Castlegar and other libraries are looking at trying to provide the same level of service Creston does.
That's fundamentally my question is,
Yeah.
what level of service, that conversation,
Right.
do we want to have? Why is it that a group will determine the community's level of service and the funders are excluded from that conversation? That's where I'm going with this.
Through the chair, in the province of British Columbia, you have 2 ways of setting up libraries. In Creston and Castlegar, I believe are both, no, Creston is an association. Nelson and Castlegar, I may have this wrong, are municipal. Presently, the province will no longer approve libraries to be set up as associations like Creston is. So if So just, so like that's, and I don't know the full reasons for that. One of the things, in talking with a number of the libraries is my understanding from a number of chief librarians across the district is that they are preparing to present to the board how each of the libraries are similar, how each of them are different. But they are really like completely independent entities. I understand there's this push-pull between who is determining the service level. Sometimes they believe that they are. They're supposed to be arm's length from government. Um, but in reality, the funding determines the service level. So what is granted in the end determines the service level. In that case of where funding is the driver, then their job is to tell you as elected officials how that funding impacts that service level. So my understanding, they did try to do that in their presentation. They're saying the 587 keeps the service level the same as it was last year. And the increase, it sounds like there may be some different plans, but that the increase would allow them to open on Fridays. That is what I recall from their presentation. It is very, each of the libraries have some certain different fundamentals in their operation. So for example, Nelson's is underneath shares a building with the city police. Creston's and Castlegar's are independent buildings. They may be different sizes, they may have different utility costs. But it is something that I've talked to each of them. And my understanding is that they're preparing a presentation for the board. Note though that Castlegar's present budget, if you were to pull up what you received in a couple weeks ago, you'll notice that there's a large increase in 2027. So what I have seen is that the way that one-time provincial grant was used by the libraries, Castlegar used it, spread out its allocation in their budgets across more years than Creston and Nelson did. But it is resulting in an increase in 2027.
4%.
More significant. No, in
4% for
2027
years.
is a lot more than 4% in Castlegar.
4%, and that's coming from one of the people who approved that budget. So I don't know, see, this is the problem. No, I'm making it a bigger problem than it needs to be. Fundamentally, you have X amount of dollars that's available to provide levels of services to our community. Okay, when you compare that to another community, they're taking that same amount of money and they're able to open longer for that same amount of money. My question is, why is that? I don't dispute that we should get, well, actually as funders, we should have a say in those level of services, but we get excluded from that conversation. So I would then say, based on the amount that's being asked for, I can go with that, but we need to have 40 hours open to the public. So look at your operations and figure that out, because it's being done elsewhere. That is the logic in my mind.
Through the chair,
So that
just so we
But we
know.
had over a year to talk about this.
Yeah, so, through the chair, so like, Castlegar, so remember like, each of the services are set up differently. So this is the only service where you see the town of Creston funding, area C funding, area A funding, area B funding, sorry, got those out of order, APC. But where in Castlegar and Nelson, there are municipal funds. You don't see that in the RDCK budget going to them. You see funding for Nelson come from area H and area F. And in Castlegar, you see it coming from area I and area J separately. In 2026, just the area J requisition goes from, for Castlegar, goes from 105 to 109. In 2027, it goes from 109 to 121. And so that it's the way that they use this grant. They make independent decisions from each other. I agree, Director Vandenberg. Like the one thing is that they're answering each to different governing bodies. I've explained to them that this is causing confusion in the system. It's not just around this table. And hopefully when they come together and present to the board where you can have more than one chief librarian talking about how these services work, it may be something that's helpful.
Well, I can't keep belaboring it. I made my points very clear. And I don't think it's fair to the taxpayers. It's a question of the level of services, and as a funder, what is that level of service that we're comfortable with on behalf of the taxpayers? So,
As far as this year, we're agreed on the amount.
but we've started this conversation a year ago, and it didn't change.
But we have to make a decision immediately on the amount. The rest of it, we'll have to just.
Through the chair, there's another strategy that's in the budget. And if you want, we can just look at it quickly. The grant to the library, I just want to be like, it's such a hard job for us as staff when we're doing this piece, because this is a contribution service. They need to advocate themselves for their funding. It's not really something that I or Trisha in the future is to do. But there is also, at the last meeting, Director Jackman was just bringing up, like, do we have sufficient reserves? How can we use our reserves? What is that process? Just know, unfortunately, it splits across 2 pages, but at the bottom of the budget, you can see if we look at the page, what page is this? This is page 11. Page one of the library presentation, page 11 of the package. If you scroll to the bottom, it shows the estimated reserve balance. So at the end of 2025, we have approximately 584, 430. Not all entries have been made in that yet. What we are proposing to do in 2026 is transfer. Geez, I wonder if I missed a calculation in there. Oh no, that's right. Just looks similar. It's dyslexia. The fact it drops $50,000 as we're pulling from reserve, approximately. And you can see how what I'm trying to show you on the next page along the bottom are the very last line is what is being funded by requisition. So in 2025, in terms of everything that we would call, whether it's a contribution to reserve, a capital project, or that asset management piece, Director Jackman, like there was none for that asset management piece last year. The only contribution from requisition was $16,000, and that went into reserve. The rest of that funding for reserve was hopefully coming from the interest in that reserve is generating. And that's the entry that's still actually not made yet. In 2026, we're suggesting it's 23,973. That's easy to see where it comes from. we're pulling 50 from reserve. The capital expenditures we're planning there, as Craig had explained, the planning for engineering work is the $50,000 of capital. Those two things are offsetting. The 23,973 is the reserve, or sorry, is the asset management piece. We are not contributing requisition to the reserve.
Okay, that's asset control. I get that. That's fine.
So it's just, you could,
We can, I'm chair and I'm not going to agree to this. I have made my points and I think it's incumbent that I'm gonna leave that alone for now because it's not gonna get any better.
I suggest, because it's noon, that we take at least a 5-minute recess. And, we know we have a workshop at 2. Are you all willing to stay till a workshop, break for lunch? What do you want to do? 'Cause,
I'm gonna go back to Boswell for the workshop, because I have to go from
you
Boswell.
have to, yeah.
So I'm leaving here in an hour.
We'll continue with this. Let's take a 5-minute recess and continue then if that's okay. Okay. Some of this might not take as long because Rec Center has a lot of pages, but probably.
To Joe, I do appreciate that, oh, he's on the phone now, cash flow, sure, I appreciate that extra one.
through, and Gary, like, that's just where, like, hopefully we can start balancing those pieces together. Craig? Nope. Can you hear me? Right. I'm gonna put in chat the recommendation for the I've sent it to everybody in email. I'm gonna put that in chat as well, because sometimes some people don't look at their email. Just because all that does is balance 2025. So right now in 2025, we're in deficit because of the purchase. And technically, we should do a financial amendment anyways. Yeah, okay, all right, so just I don't know, maybe be better if I just don't want to end up in an argument again, but anyways, so um yeah, yeah, okay, talk to you later. Okay, bye.
plan amendment for the S201, to make it the 2025 year balance because of that business deal, that purchase we did. So he sent that resolution to the committee this morning.
Okay, so I gotta open up my email?
I can just read it, it's brief, if you want, I'll just read it.
Sure.
Okay, so he said this, recommend to the board that the board approve an amendment to the 2025 financial plan from the Regional Park Service, Town of Creston areas. B, C, that's 201, to include the purchase of property in the amount of 815,515, and further at the account 54030 contracted services be decreased by 88,063. That accounts 5040 Celtic service be decreased by 15,000, and that account 60,000 capital be increased 859,515. That account 45000 transfer from reserves be increased to 58,283. That account 41020 grant and room taxes be increased 691. That account 4333025 grant specified be increased 696,030, and that account prior year surplus be increases 1,448. So Joe, I know you're back, read this out, and I guess I want you to chime in on this so that
So what's a grade 3 version of this?
yeah, give us a
Oh, sorry for all the, sorry for all
I just wanna make
the.
sure I got enough money for West Crescent in there. Because Roger took it all. Roger got it all.
Through the chair, everything just needs to add up to zero, so needs to net out at zero, so sorry for all the little increases or changes. But it's just because we made the purchase. The purchase itself was approved by the board, so all of that stuff is correct. But the financial plan never reflected the purchase. So this just keeps the financial plan at net zero. All of those changes have this corresponding real funding in them, and it just balances to zero. So what it enables is for myself to be able to transfer from reserve, the parkland dedication funding from area B to contribute towards that purchase, and a small portion of funding from the general reserve for the service to fund the purchase of the property.
All right, so how much money is gonna be left in what happened to the account? What's going on with the requisitions? I see a 7.4% increase from 25 to 26. And then it goes to a 1%, 3%, 1%. What's going on there? What do we have left over here in the money for the parks?
So through the chair, the recommendation, no matter what, the recommendation, what it does is it balances 2025. What would be different if we didn't do it, just to be clear, is that in 2026, instead of, where is S2? Come on, let's see. There we are. In S201 in 2026, if we don't do that, it would start with a $56,000 deficit in 2026, and we end up doing something similar. So it wouldn't change. This change does not impact the requisition for 2026. So the
How
two
much
things
money
are-
do I have?
two things are in
How
the-
much money do we have to work with to work on parks?
You still have so if you were to look down below at where it says estimated reserve balances.
Yep, 210,070.
Yeah, so it shows that we started 2025 under the 2025 budget. For reserve 188, it shows 185,686.
Yeah.
To the left in the actual, it shows that after you were to do this, if you were to do this recommendation to the board, it would be 158.20.
All right, so how much of an increase of requisitions are you asking for us?
The increase in requisition has very little to do with this recommendation. It has to do with there being no
reserves.
surplus from 2025 to 2026.
So how much are you asking for a requisition increase from 25 to 26?
If, again, the requisition increase is a 7.47%. It's the 187 to 201.
7.47%.
Yeah, and if you look at the prior years, if we look at just looking at totals here, prior year's surplus going from 29,000 to 0. The recommendation that I don't know if it's been moved or seconded yet. It makes that prior year's surplus on line 49100 0, or else that amount would be negative $56,000.
All right, thank you. My last question is, how are these requisitions prorated, Creston B and C? Is it equally, or is it a proration formula?
It's all by assessment. So the
Okay.
Director Jack, does anybody have their sheets from the?
No, that's fine. That's all I need to hear. It's by assessment. Good. I thank you so much. Roger, stay out of the cookie jar. You got it.
Okay, so, that is actually, recommended to the board, so from here, then we make a recommendation to the board with this particular email. the way it's written.
Okay.
Robin has that email, so she's got that in the minutes.
Okay, so we agreed on the recommendation,
Yes.
all right, so Joe, you got your wish by sending us this message. Thank you. So,
Can I ask
that's only part
Chair
of it.
to Robin? I don't remember the agenda prep. Is there a placeholder for this meeting on the board agenda, or you're gonna have to give Christine or someone a heads up? Because they weren't expecting recommendations to the
There
board.
is not.
So just so she knows for agenda items, because she wouldn't have had, if we did agenda prep yesterday, she wouldn't have had a placeholder. But just to stick that in there for the agenda. Otherwise it could get lost
That's true, yeah,
and it's too late.
and there's a short turnaround for that.
Thanks. It's, we missed it. So let's go. Good turnaround stuff.
Super. Very good. So if we look at our 2026 budget, we okay with that? Okay. We're okay with our 2026 budget, so that means we can move to service 224, the rec facility.
The little one, easy.
This is a big,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
So-
through the. Oh,
Go ahead, Joe.
Frank.
So
So
that's our,
Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, sorry, through the chair. So from the time that you would have seen this budget at the special board budget meeting, the requisition amount is quite a bit less. I didn't put in there what it was at that meeting. So right now we're showing a 2.5% increase. What drove that change? Is if we go down to the debentures, so that is not on the front page of that, but on the next page, it is line 56010 and 56020. At the time of that, your last budget meeting, in particular, the interest payment 56010, we had that budgeted at $860,000. The reason it was budgeted at that amount is that we knew that there was a renewal coming in 2025 that would impact 2026, but the rate that was estimated that it came in at was less, significantly less than what we estimated. So that is that that primary change there. Everything that you see highlighted in blue, all we're trying to do there, and to Director Jackman, this is trying to show this flow, trying to show a flow of money for a capital asset management piece. In that, those are all those capital asset management related expenses in 2026. I tried to illustrate at the bottom what the present reserve balance is, what our projected reserve balance will be at the end of 2026, primarily, and Craig can explain the big capital projects that are in there. You can see under that same title there, we have all the expense accounts that we feel relate to capital and asset work and what those expenses have been, whether it be the actuals that we spent in 2025, what we budgeted in 2025, what we are budgeting in 2026, where that funding came from for those things. So in 2025, the requisition funding for the work that we did do was around 902,000. That any money that you can see that we budgeted about 1.35 of that coming from requisition, that will directly relate to the surplus amounts. And we tried to split that out into the capital surplus and operational surplus to the best of our ability. And then in 2026, we're again showing where that requisition funding for that project is coming from. I'm trying to do this quick, so I don't know if there's any questions about this first front page.
It's really nice to see the split. And once Ship has that split for every budget between real surplus and money that's gonna have to be spent, whether we like it or not, that'll help. So it is nice to see that. And then I think Craig already answered the question that, yeah, you think you're gonna do the asset management exercise this year, you're gonna do them all. And so the timing of the money, the flow is no reason to expect it to change.
Through the chair, it's been, anticipated being 2026 budget being spent in 2026.
Yeah, somewhat aggressive. That's good if you get on with it, I guess.
I guess the bottom line question is, are we okay with, what we see here, 2.5? No.
Well, the only question I have to ask is this, I mean, this is a huge budget. And I really, I look at the staff and I trust that Vandenberg's gonna ask this question. And that is, are we certain that we have what we need to have versus what we would like to have? Do we have a balanced conversation in that? Because some of you may be there, but we have our meeting with the public and they are very pointed about the questions that they're asking on these level of services. And our rep center is our crown jewel. And we really looked at it maintaining the level of service that it does and being frugal with our taxpayers' contribution.
Dr. Jackson.
So I can build on that. I like the way we saw it because there's a lot of extra sheets here. So whether it was pool or whatever, or the fitness area, the thing I kept concentrating on is where we expected staff levels to be. We're running light on a number, but we're still delivering quite a bit of program. We don't have a lot of cancel things. We seem to have fairly high customer satisfaction. I like the reports we're getting every month on that. So the one thing we talked about after COVID was how to get back up to a reasonable level of service, get everybody back in and make sure they're able to use the facility when they can or want to use it. So I'm wondering if there's a point where we say we don't need to get back to any other level. So I think we're kind of there. We're not aspiring to increase any hours of service right now. And I think if there's any trimming to be done, we kind of did it over the last year or two. We're still running light on salaries in some places, but I think that was just gaps. We didn't have the lifeguards, little gaps. So it'd be another full year. The level of service is pretty well planed out before we see whether or not we're carrying more for staff and benefits in the budget that we actually need.
Through the chair, I'll answer that question. I think the annual report we got from finance, the December statement showed us if we budgeted 1.93 million, we spent 1.91. So we're very close to our service level, and we heard the commission last year, especially about the pool, not trying to get back to pre-pandemic hours, and we kept that static, and we intend to keep that static with some minor hours during the summer adjustment, not addition.
Yep.
But I think we're at a sustainable level for staffing right now, and yeah, there were some gaps with people being off, that kind of a thing, and there was some variation in the staffing levels as it relates to programming and as programs are set up and people either participate or they don't. But I think the other question for Director Vandenberg is, we've scrutinized this budget. The process involves more than just one or two people. I think there's about 8 people involved in this one, from programming to operations and other places. And we are very confident that what this represents is mostly a need to have. There are some numbers in there that we don't know what they'll be, in lieu of coming back to the commission for additional asks, things like equipment, for example, which we underspent this year, knowing that, we had heard the commission say, well, if you don't spend it, then you can use it next year, that kind of thing. We do have a bit of an increase there for equipment, so we can quantify that as necessary. Pieces of equipment for fitness. There's one for the parks, where we need a cab for our zero-turn mower, that kind of thing. So those are identified. And repairs and maintenance, again, with the needs of this facility increasing as it ages, we can quantify those asks certainly with a list to the commission or the committee if that's required. But this is mostly a need to have budget, and it is as tight as we can make it at this point.
Appreciate your honesty.
So can I make one more comment then? So because you have kind of the right level of staff, reasonable level of service, people seem happy, you're still relying on $330,000 prior year surplus. So will that become a hole next year? Joe's hands up there.
If we go to the 5-year budget.
So do we roll enough that ahead?
So it's a great point, Director Jackman. And in particular, in the 5-year budget, if we look at, so there's 2 5-year budgets. So the first one you'll see, to be clear, we were trying to manage that surplus across multiple years to spread its impact out. So on line 49100, on the first 5-year presentation, the one that has the 2.5% going across the top for requisition, you'll see that the projected operational surplus in 2026 is 329,785. We project keeping, so we have in the budget an accumulated surplus budget line of 78,000 that we would bring into 2027. Then in 2027, we have an accumulated operating surplus budget line of 39,914, which we would bring into 2028 to smooth out that requisition piece going forward. In particular, on that 5 years, is just to point out at the bottom, at the very bottom of that presentation, so down to where it says reserve capital asset management balance. Again, they're trying to show what our reserve balances are, how we're using those reserves to balance out those capital projects moving forward, what it leaves our projected reserves at in 2030, and how much funding is coming from requisition in each one of those years to fund those expenses. At the very bottom is the debenture schedule. so that you can, we're starting to get to where the point where this will start showing up in the 5-year plan. The first debentures expire in 2032. So that's the first year, 2032 in the 5-year plan will be the first year where you see that starting to decrease. And then they'll be fully paid off in 2020, 2033 and 2035. The second 5-year plan, it's just for illustration purposes, shows what happens if we change that a little bit so that we have a certain amount of money in reserves at the end. This may not be, maybe something that is just discussed throughout the year because it doesn't impact this year.
So you're showing good level of service, stable staffing, very modest increases in anticipated salaries, expenses, and predict what other consumable supplies that go up and down. But we're still burning $250,000 of the operating surplus and only rolling that other bit ahead. And balancing it, as you say, with reserves. I didn't look far enough to say, if we drop that amount of debt starting in 2032, we will come into a very good position in not too many years. So not playing with a very big risk of digging a hole here. Unless we need to borrow $10 million to fix something major or do something that's not contemplated. So that seems like a good stable approach. It's just you're projecting an increase lower than everything else. Is that a risk? Doesn't seem to be if we can stick it out till 2032 with no big unforeseen emergencies.
Yeah, through the chair, I'll just fill in a little bit of the blanks and the uncertainty piece where when we do the facility condition assessments, we anticipate that the capital numbers that are in the 5-year plan will change. And so that'll be a different conversation on a year-to-year basis on how we fund that, whether that's through borrowing or through requisitions or reserve, which to Joe's point, at the end of 5 years, currently we'll show a $400,000 reserve. So we have a modest capital outlay, but there are some other considerations for this property that will be coming to this committee based on, I think the town of Creston had a conversation about baseball fields the other day. That was in open, so I can speak about it. And that is something that we've talked about, but that will be for a future meeting that could inform what these numbers look like down the road.
Thank you, Judy.
Yeah, Craig, I just want to ask about that $75,000 for paving. Starting to repave the parking lot, or
Yeah.
the portion?
Yeah, through the chair, we're doing patch paving and we had in years past up until this year, 2025, we put about 125,000 into that, and then through that, trying to do a scope like that, and then through our administrative processes, having to go to the board to award a contract of that size delays us from time to time, and so we right-size that into a $75,000 chunk of paving that we can then administer through the CAO signing off on a contract, and then we get late season pricing. So we are just looking at patching it from year to year to, over time get us to the point where that parking lot is in pretty good shape.
Also, you can't close the whole parking lot or half the parking lot. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
To do half of it at a time.
And through the chair, we will be in for that kind of a scenario in Nelson, where that parking lot is very confined and one way in, one way out, and it will be challenging to close that one. So we do have the luxury here at having a larger space.
And that will start this year, and then,
Well, through the chair, since my time, we've been doing it every year.
okay.
Yeah,
Bit by bit. Any other questions on that? There's a lot of other parts here to service to forward. I don't know if we need to go through them all because I guess the bottom line was the overall increase here.
Well, we have spent time talking about the CDCC. Shouldn't be anything unusual jumping out at us on there. So. Gary's contribution was pretty good. I'm thinking outside, talking outside.
Do we fly right along and go to the airport? Sorry, humor the
Through the chair, there's
Yeah.
Oh, only one question for this budget, just based upon the conversation around cemeteries. Is to remember that you do have a large grant section of this budget. And
Yeah,
I don't
discussed.
know if you would like the same strategy that we had for cemeteries apply to this.
I'd like each of the hall boards to send one person to sit down and have a conversation. You know, we haven't red circled them yet, giving them little tiny lifts, but I'd like to know where they're at. And there's huge disparity to,
Yeah.
you know, what's going on at Windle there, closed versus some of the other halls. So it'd be great to have that conversation.
I agree. Yeah.
I agree as well.
Through the chair, would you like it to be the same thing where I don't, right now, they're part of that FSG process as well?
If I can share, I'm less worried with leaving the names and the numbers there than with the cemetery. I feel the cemetery is the most random of our governance sort of decisions versus I think the halls. They all have so much more in terms of expenses. None of them are building big reserves, I don't think.
However, they are getting very well supported, by volunteers and trust.
And see, that's good.
But the problem with that is, there's a reliance that occurs to Columbia Basin Trust, and then there's a break off. And we see that a number of times with other entities that are out there, is that our funding is gonna end with CVT, and so then there's a big lift and ask. This is debated. Our conversations with people allow us to talk about sustainability. What are you building in to be sustainable? What happens when? You know, that sort of thing. And so that's the value in these conversations. And I've seen it happen a number of times. Just last year, CPT is no longer funding. Where are we gonna get the money from?
Well, they're adding assets like generators are being discussed everywhere. If it's a diesel generator, either you're gonna have somebody who's pretty handy wrenching, or you're gonna have a new expense to your whole operation. That the third option is the genset just won't fire up when you need it. Yeah, they're adding stuff to the facilities where they either have to add volunteers or have some other way to fund it.
But to Kelly's point, in Kitchener, they are building a new park to the tune of 850,000. So that's a large asset, which you know, how will the community fund that going
Maintenance.
forward, maintenance wise and whatnot?
Well, Greg, Gold River Residency Association, little triangular park. You know, and then it was maintenance, who's gonna cut the grass, and then it was, you know, fences are starting to fall down, so they just removed everything.
I'm glad they did, 'cause
We better fly off to the airport.
Yeah, that's my right.
I have one question.
Go ahead.
We don't know a lot about the future governance and structure of that site, and lots of really good ideas coming forward, a master plan, all that stuff. The huge change here is contribution to reserve, and so there's two choices. We give it to the town of Creston to hold it in service as a regional district reserve until we know what's gonna happen down the road. And the only reason I asked the question is because we made a decision about the alternative water supply reserve for the fire systems, and then found out we were a little bit hampered later with how can we mobilize that money, or what is that number even, and who decides? So where we put that reserve, to me, is still wide open. We can just hold it in service. And if there's something we need to move it towards, then move it to town or to whatever, whoever. We might find we're moving it to the society till the governance thing is sorted out. And it's a big chunk of money. 45,000 a year, 46,000 a year.
One thing I can say towards that is, of course, as you know, we're applying for a very large grant for the runway. And that will require more funding than we need, which the town of Creston has said we would be willing to provide that funding in the interim, so we want that paid back, so therefore, if you do the reserve contribution to the town of Creston, at least put some money in that account.
But yes, but it can hold as the regional district reserve account to be moved later. Because we don't actually have a structure around how to bank money under this. Right now, we're just operational pretty much. So I just thought that line item should say reserve contribution. And we can hold it as regional district. It can be as flexible as it needs to be. But we know where we're going. Because we don't even have an agreement if money goes to the town as reserve money, exactly for what?
I agree.
For snowplows or for runway extensions or whatever. I'd rather we had some words on the page, which we will have in so many months, and then we can know. Because the other one where we put reserved at the town, water, we never defined what that would be or what it would look like. It's just sitting there. So
Here's my suggestion. Do it the way you're suggesting. If for some reason our CFO or DAO have a compelling reason for it not to be that way,
Yeah.
we'll consider
yeah,
that.
for
Okay.
March. Yeah. Good idea.
Okay, so we've had a conversation around this and it's really a leap of faith. So the cost of services and what are we gonna get in return is undecided. We have a master plan that says we have our hands tied. We have the ability to think that by investing into this property, into the airport, we should be able to get some reasonable return, but we have no idea what that is. So that's my leap of faith. And you're asking for 50 grand, 45,000 to go into a reserve, start building reserves, which we've already discussed, should have been occurring a long time ago, but they weren't. So my leap of faith is hinged on, if I'm here for the next, another term, I'm going to want to see how we're moving that needle to get our return on our investment. And once again, I think it's incumbent upon us to start putting together a set of a messaging campaign to the province and whomever, that not only this small airport, but all of the small airports within this province need to have the shackles removed so that they have an opportunity to generate revenue. And I will stress that every time that we sit down and talk about the airport. We have a lot of great people that form our society there, and they need to be understanding and on board with this too, because they have their own networks of opportunity. So
I see this leap of faith, good term. I used leap of faith over a planning decision 2.5 years ago, and I regret I said that. 1.5 years ago, June 2024. Remember exactly why I said it. I don't regret it here. The first thing we'll get out of this is we're going to say, we put money on the table and go to the province and say, give us that major grant, the runway, because we may be at risk of a huge barrier to having effective air ambulance service. Because even though they're not transferring all or swapping all their planes out to the ones required, they'll have temperature and weight restrictions. There's enough of them, and there's enough other little towns that are going to want those aircraft to come to their little grounds. I think this is the way you say, we put our money on the table, go down and talk to some ministers and say, you put your money on the table. Tomorrow, when hopefully you show up at the hospital district, we put our money on the table for third floor of that addition at Regional Hospital. And we're going to ask, well, first, you see if you fund Dave and I as chair and vice, whatever your decision was. Then we're going to ask you to say, let us go down and talk to 2 ministers about exactly our money's on the table. Don't look around with us, get on with it. So this, to me, is the biggest reason I want to see this money on the table. Mm-hmm. The second thing, yes, revenues and fuel and other stuff like that. But I think the most urgent concern to me is to say our money's on the table. We're ready to pay for our share, whatever it is. Let's make sure that we don't fall to a lower standard and jeopardize access to health service. So it's two things to me. And if the revenue thing takes another year, that's fine. If the pressure for the grant can be applied this summer, that's preferable.
Agreed. So that takes care of all of our
So,
services.
so we're leaving this as is, except it'll say transfer to reserve. Period.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
name yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. One more item.
Yeah, enhanced policing. That you have introduced or suggested.
So I guess here we are at the end of another budget cycle. We've talked about, there's oars in the water when it comes to enhanced policing, the opportunity to help our local detachment with resources. We've talked about it, but we have not decided what we're gonna do about it. I thought this might be an opportunity to decide, if we don't agree to something in terms of the budget, then it's lost for another year. And is that prudent? Am I missing the point there? And part of the opportunity is, and I have circulated with you an idea, a concept that, of trying to, increase resources by, not having to hire an officer per se. What do you call those people who are not military? Civilian solution, which I think might be at least something that our staff can talk to our staff sergeant about, and that could be maybe an interim measure. So all I've done is said, I've worked with this in the past, here's my past experience, this is a program, we can talk about it, but I guess we're at the table right now saying, what, do we need to have any funding consideration for our policing resources? Because I think it's because we have not decided that we need to have anything. This is budget time.
You don't have a mechanism to move money into that, it's a problem. That's why we did the earlier outreach to community saying, would you support it? And it was $25 to $30 nominally per household. Would you support a regional district service to supplement the RCMP at that time to get 0.5 FTE admin and 2 officers, I think. That's back when an officer cost $125,000 a year. So we started the conversation with the community about establishing a mechanism to pull that money in, transfer it to detachment. Right now, we don't have any mechanism to pull any money in. We can't move money from this rec service to RCMP. I mean, you can move $1,000 here and there, maybe as some exceptional event, but we don't have the mechanism. That's where we have to maybe go back to what Stu and Mike might be working on in terms of the bigger picture of RCMP. It's not a general admin thing. It's not a rural admin thing. We just don't have a silo to even talk about. We would allocate money from.
So our CAOs are working on stick handling through some opportunities for us to consider. And of course, we want that work to, we're really interested to hear what the results of that might be. But without this mechanism, there is no budget consideration, is really what I'm hearing.
There used to be ride along and other levels of support in this town, going back to Mike Fisher, one of the other, for all you know, might have gone to you know, how he's our member of parliament, but way back, we used to have an auxiliary plan model here. I can't remember if it was completely voluntary, there must have been training and stuff to it, how it was funded.
There was training and I don't know how the funding model is, of course there was training for that.
Yeah.
And there was uniforms and there was the outside arms of the whole works. So I think what happened was the actual liability of having the risk to them became prohibitive, and so that's why they discontinued it, because there were some incidents that happened in the province that made them question, is this the right approach? And that led to the decision not to, because there's no such thing in BC as auxiliaries, to my knowledge now.
I was an auxiliary for 10 years, but your bylaw officer is acting as an auxiliary now.
Say peace officer.
Yes, peace officer status, but
So did they in the past, it was provincial police.
yeah, I wouldn't say he's an auxiliary police officer. He has peace officer status, which gives him authority to do what he does.
Yeah.
It also gives him authority under the direction of the RCMP if he's with them. And that's similar to a conservation officer. We had peace officer status, we had all this. But when we overlapped with the RCMP into their stuff, it was done on basically in exigent circumstances under their direction. So that we could be a reliable backup if we absolutely had to be. But there was no, other than that, there was no program for that. Not as
There's no
CEOs.
program exists now. He's doing it. There's no program that exists now.
Well, I think he could operate again under their direction. But he doesn't have that authority without operating strictly under their direction in the time where he's with them and there's an overlap. Otherwise, he would not have that authority.
It sounds very similar to what your program was.
There's one example we could pursue. Nick Sparrow has his enhanced medical team across the central Coogee. He's based out of Nelson, Breno. And he started conversation with some of our staff about how first responders, including fire service members, could come into the zones that normally everybody's prohibited, except those under the direct control of the RCMP. So you have that active shooting zone or whatever it is, active zone, bomb threat. And then there's a zone where first responders can come into but can't cross a certain line. And so only the RCMP could go in, try and pull people out or whatever to the medical treatment zone. And then of course there's a zone behind it with all the community members and public reporters, whatever. So Nick Sparrow had started a conversation with what would you need to do to allow people to move into that zone of higher danger. So it was a different take on the training required, the sidearm training, stuff like that. But he had that conversation with us a few years ago. He's still around. I mean, that would be the only model. If the auxiliary model was done by the way that Dodo worked, that would be a model to start with.
But I doubt whether that program you're suggesting or that pathway and the auxiliary program from the past, either of those I think would substitute from what our staff sergeant is asking for. One additional officer that would give people a break and could work on his own.
Sergeant level. I was asking for a sergeant.
Sorry.
What they're missing is a sergeant level.
So yeah, somebody's working on their own right now. So it's not really the discussion we're having is not really supporting the ask. It's
He articulated it well on Tuesday at the council meeting, when the questions were asked and why that's necessary. And, further to that whole conversation is the request from the town of Creston to examine staffing levels in our entire area and have the RC, have policing services give us more staff. And, our aim would be ultimately to go to 24/7 policing. But that comes at a huge cost. And so we don't know if we'll get there. But currently, the workload for what's there added to the fact that there are vacant positions makes the work very challenging. So like I say, we want to address that through the minister, see if we can get some movement on just examining the staffing model here, see if we're at the right level, because we haven't had an increase. We've increased our populations and not everything else. We haven't increased police officers. So the operations sergeant is a bit of a leap of faith that we're doing what we can to make sure that our police are supported here. Now it's time for the problem to do their part. So I haven't had a chance to really study your proposal here as to how that kind of interlocks with what we hope to do in this valley. So,
And I'm okay with you sharing that with CAO. So what it really is a crime analyst position.
yeah, I see that.
And what we found in past that became a very key position to help coordinate the actual officer boots on the ground. This person did a lot of analysis work, helped them set their day, helped them set their hotspots, collect the data, help with the reporting, administrative work, that sort of thing. And you know, the cost is less than hiring a full-time, fully trained RCMP, but it certainly assists greatly the overall detachment operations. And that's something that we don't need the permission from the province and the feds to do that. We can just agree to hire this position, you know, under the auspices of the staff sergeant and his agreement that this would make sense. And then at least that buys us some time. But as Gary pointed out, we don't have a mechanism, you know, other than discretionary. We can discretionary grant the heck out of it, I suppose. I don't know. But I think the concept is worth exploring with, when I tried to describe it somewhat to the staff sergeant in passing, I saw his reaction being, oh, he kind of, you know, but he had his radio and cell phone was going off left, right, and center. He did not have time to think this through.
Yeah.
I would love to have this, and if it's not agreeable by the staff sergeant, that's fine, but at least I feel comfortable that I'm trying to offer a solution for a period of time until something more permanent can come along.
Well, I'll take it to our CAO, definitely. Perhaps have more of a consultation with our staff sergeant as well.
The other thing we've seen is Grace McGregor, so she's rural, like a little further from Grand Forks.
Christine Lake.
Christine Lake area. We hire a commissioner through grant funding. And with some success to sort of chase down the loose ends around the community, especially with the shifts in population seasonally. Trouble is, I wouldn't want to go to a staff sergeant to talk about anything that's grant funded, because I wouldn't want any entity to try and kind of shift how they do business. At risk that the grant funding will stop, and then that's just disruptive. So I think it comes down to reliability of funding.
Yeah.
Because if you're already fairly stressed managing everything you got to manage, you don't want to try and make a change and then have to change back.
And I remind everybody that we did talk about an SRO program, and that needs to remain on the table, but that requires funding, shared funding with the school district as a partner, because you cannot even begin to suggest what the benefits of having a school resource officer is. It's so huge.
Especially in light of the definite number of it.
It's just another sort of, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anything else before we,
Public time or public.
anybody, there's an observer online.
Observer, and we had reporters on. I thought they're gone now.
Looks like the Vista Radio reporter is gone. We do have an observer. Any questions from our observer?
They might go to the chat. So
No questions.
No questions.
answer through chat.
So, and so Chair and staff, I appreciate this. This is good to have this conversation, because we have not had this in the past, and this really helps a lot, the ability to get on the table what's on our mind and try to figure out how this stuff works, because it's still, I'm not, it'll take me 17 years like Director Jackman to start figuring this stuff out.
Only took me the first 15.
15.